Hello everyone.
About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did.
I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Story 1. It was a crisp autumn morning when I awoke to a chilling realization. The sunlight filtered through the curtains of my bedroom, casting a warm glow over the room, but something felt off. As I rolled over in bed, I noticed an unusual draft. The cold air that greeted me was a stark contrast to the cozy warmth I had felt just hours earlier. My heart raced as I pushed back the covers and stepped out of bed. It was then that I saw my front door stood wide open, its metal frame creaking slightly as it swayed in the breeze. Panic surged through me as I quickly crossed the room, my mind racing with the possibilities of what could have happened. My phone, which I always kept on the nightstand, was nowhere to be found. It had vanished, along with its familiar, reassuring presence. I rushed to the door and peered out into the hallway. The corridor was empty and eerily quiet. I glanced back at my apartment, taking in the disarray drawers slightly open, cushions askew on the sofa. It was clear that someone had been here, and the thought made my skin crawl. My immediate concern was to ensure my safety. I pulled the door closed and locked it, securing the entry before making my way to the kitchen to collect my thoughts. My first instinct was to call the police, but with my phone missing, I had to use a landline in the building's lobby. I dialed the emergency number, trying to keep my voice steady as I explained the situation to the dispatcher. They assured me that officers would be sent immediately to investigate. As I hung up, I felt a surge of anxiety. There was no telling what had transpired while I slept. While waiting for the police, I remembered that my apartment was equipped with security cameras. The system was designed to monitor the entrance in a few key areas within my home. The footage could offer crucial information about the intruder's identity and actions. I hurried to the small room where the security system's monitor was located and began reviewing the footage from the previous night. The footage started at midnight, showing me sleeping soundly in my bed. For the first few hours, the video was uneventful, simply capturing the serene and silent interior of my apartment. My heart pounded as I fast-forwarded through the hours, searching for any sign of disturbance. Suddenly, at around 3 a.m., a shadowy figure appeared in the frame. The intruder moved with deliberate caution, their form obscured by the dim lighting. I watched in stunned silence as the figure approached my front door, which had been left slightly ajar. The intruder slipped inside, barely making a sound. The footage showed them moving quietly through my apartment. They paused for a moment near the entrance, as if assessing their surroundings, before making their way to my bedroom. My pulse quickened as I saw the intruder hovering over my sleeping form, their presence menacing and intrusive. The camera's poor resolution made it difficult to discern any facial features, but the figure's movements were deliberate and unsettling. The intruder then seemed to locate my phone on the nightstand. With swift efficiency, they grabbed the device and slipped it into their pocket before retreating towards the front door. The entire intrusion lasted less than 15 minutes, but the sense of violation it left behind was profound. As the police arrived, I shared the footage with them, hoping it would provide some leads. The officers reviewed the video with a mix of concern and professionalism. They took note of the timestamps, the intruder's movements, and the missing phone. They assured me they would do everything in their power to track down the perpetrator and recover my belongings. In the meantime, I was advised to secure my apartment thoroughly. The officers helped me check the locks and reinforced the importance of changing any compromised passwords or personal information that might be accessible through my stolen phone. I followed their advice, making sure to contact my phone provider to report the theft and suspend any services linked to the device. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and uncertainty. The intrusion had left me feeling vulnerable and unsafe in my own home. I took extra precautions, installing additional security measures and ensuring that every entry point was secure. Despite the police's efforts, there were no immediate breakthroughs in the investigation. I tried to go about my daily routine, but the fear of another intrusion lingered. Every noise, every shadow felt magnified, and I found myself constantly on edge. The once comforting familiarity of my apartment now felt foreign and threatening. I began to avoid being alone at home whenever possible, staying with friends or family for added security. As the weeks passed, the investigation continued without any significant developments. The missing phone was never recovered, and the intruder remained unidentified. While the immediate danger seemed to have passed, the psychological impact of the experience was lasting. I had become acutely aware of the vulnerability of my personal space and the potential risks of everyday life. The ordeal taught me valuable lessons about personal security and the importance of vigilance. It also highlighted the need for effective measures to protect one's privacy and belongings. Despite the unsettling experience, I tried to find solace in the steps I had taken to enhance my security and the support I received from loved ones and law enforcement. Though the intrusion had been a harrowing ordeal, it ultimately reinforced the need for proactive measures and heightened awareness of one's surroundings. The shadowy figure who had entered my home left behind a legacy of fear, but it also served as a reminder of the importance of resilience and the commitment to ensuring one's safety and security in an unpredictable world. Story 2. It was a bright and sunny Saturday afternoon when I decided to take a break from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. I had planned a relaxing day at the local park, a place I frequently visited for its peaceful atmosphere and scenic beauty. The park was lush and green, with sprawling lawns, picturesque walking paths, and shaded areas perfect for unwinding. I packed a light picnic and set out to enjoy a well-deserved escape from work and daily routines. Upon arrival, I found a quiet spot under a large oak tree where I could lay out my blanket and enjoy the warm sun and gentle breeze. I spread out my picnic items, some sandwiches, fruit, and a good book, and settled in with a sense of contentment. The park was fairly busy with families, joggers, and children playing, but my spot was secluded enough to provide the solitude I was seeking. As I started to relax, I noticed the sounds of the park children laughing, birds chirping, and the distant hum of traffic. Everything seemed perfect until, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted something odd. A glint of metal caught my attention from the bushes that lined the edge of my picnic area. I initially thought it was just a piece of litter or some forgotten item, but my curiosity got the better of me. I decided to investigate and walked over to the bushes. Pushing aside some branches, I discovered a small, inconspicuous device nestled among the foliage. It was a hidden camera, the kind often used for surveillance or security purposes. The camera was angled directly at the spot where I had been sitting. My heart began to race as the realization of what I had found sank in. The camera was well camouflaged, blending in with the surrounding vegetation. It was small and unobtrusive, making it almost impossible to detect unless you were looking for it specifically. I took a few deep breaths, trying to steady my nerves. The thought that someone had been watching me, and possibly others in the park, was deeply unsettling. I took out my phone and snapped several photos of the camera and its placement. I then quickly gathered my belongings, feeling an overwhelming sense of unease. I knew I needed to report this, but my mind was racing with questions. Who had placed the camera there? Why? And how long had it been recording? As I walked back to the park entrance, I tried to remain calm. I approached the park ranger's office and explained the situation, showing them the photos I had taken. The ranger listened intently and assured me that they would handle the matter immediately. They promised to investigate the situation and remove the camera if it was indeed a violation of privacy. While waiting for the ranger's report, I sat on a bench near the entrance, my thoughts swirling. The peaceful day I had anticipated was now marred by the discovery of the hidden camera. I worried about the implications and the potential invasion of privacy that could affect not just me but other park goers as well. The thought of someone watching people in such a private and personal setting was deeply disturbing. After what felt like an eternity, the ranger returned with an update. They confirmed that the camera had been removed and that it was indeed a security camera placed without authorization. They also assured me that they would review the footage to determine if any laws had been broken and to identify the person responsible. The ranger took down my contact information and said they would follow up with me once the investigation was complete. I thanked them for their prompt action and left the park, feeling a mix of relief and continued anxiety. The knowledge that someone had been surveilling the park was unsettling, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The following days were filled with apprehension. I received a call from the park authorities, who informed me that the investigation had revealed that the camera was part of a larger network of unauthorized surveillance devices set up by an individual with a history of such behavior. The authorities were working to track down the person responsible and ensure that similar incidents would not occur in the future. The revelation brought a sense of relief, but the experience had a lasting impact on me. I became more conscious of my surroundings and more aware of the potential for privacy violations in public spaces. The incident prompted me to think more critically about the security and privacy issues associated with modern technology. In the end, the discovery of the hidden camera was a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance and the need to protect personal privacy, even in seemingly safe and ordinary settings. The experience underscored the potential risks of surveillance and the need for increased awareness and safeguards to ensure that personal spaces remain private and secure. Although the situation was unsettling, it also served as a catalyst for change, prompting me to advocate for greater privacy protections and to raise awareness about the risks of unauthorized surveillance. The ordeal, while distressing, reinforced the value of remaining vigilant and proactive in safeguarding one's privacy in an increasingly connected and monitored world. Story 3. It was a sunny Saturday morning when I first met my new neighbor. The move had been a whirlwind, and the chance to finally settle into the new house was a relief. The neighborhood was quiet and friendly, and I was optimistic about getting to know the people living around me. My new neighbor, who introduced herself as Lisa, seemed particularly warm and welcoming. She had a broad smile, an easy demeanor, and offered to help with the unpacking. Lisa lived next door in a quaint, well-maintained house. We exchanged pleasantries, and she invited me over for coffee once I was settled in. I accepted the offer with gratitude, eager to build a connection in my new community. Over the next few weeks, we shared several pleasant conversations and casual chats over the fence. Lisa often inquired about my daily routine, asking questions that seemed friendly but sometimes felt a bit probing. One afternoon, after a particularly busy week, I decided to tackle the overgrown backyard. I was excited about transforming it into a small garden space, envisioning weekends filled with planting and enjoying the outdoors. As I started clearing the clutter, I stumbled upon an old, weathered diary buried under a pile of leaves near the edge of the yard. Its cover was tattered, and the pages were yellowed with age. Curious, I picked it up and noticed that it had clearly been there for a while, but it was intriguing enough to take a closer look. Flipping through the pages, I quickly realized the diary was filled with detailed entries about my daily life. The notes were meticulously written, describing my routines, habits, and even personal moments I had considered private. The entries included information about the time I left for work, what I did during the day, and details about my interactions with friends and family. Some passages even mentioned specific conversations I'd had, the kinds of groceries I bought, and the hours I kept. The realization hit me like a cold wave. The diary was clearly an invasion of privacy. The detailed observations indicated that someone had been monitoring my daily activities. As I read further, I found notes that described not just my routines but also personal aspects of my life that I had only shared with close friends and family. It was as though my every move was being tracked and recorded. My heart raced as I pieced together the implications. The diary's contents were disturbing, and I couldn't help but think about my friendly neighbor, Lisa. The timeline of the diary entries coincided with the period when I had been getting to know her. She had seemed so friendly and genuinely interested in my life, but now I couldn't ignore the unsettling feeling that she might have been the one documenting my every move. I decided to confront the situation with caution. I needed to ensure that I had all the facts before making any accusations. I began by reviewing my interactions with Lisa more critically, trying to remember if there had been any indications that she was more interested in my life than she had let on. The more I thought about it, the more I recalled moments when her questions seemed unusually specific or intrusive. To gather more information, I decided to discuss the matter with a trusted friend. I wanted to get a second opinion and ensure I was not jumping to conclusions. My friend was shocked by the details I shared and advised me to document everything I had found in the diary. We agreed that it was crucial to gather evidence and consider the best course of action. I contacted a local private investigator, explaining the situation and showing them the diary. The investigator conducted a thorough background check on Lisa and confirmed that she had no known history of such behavior. However, they did uncover that Lisa had a history of boundary issues in previous neighborhoods, which added a layer of complexity to the situation. Feeling increasingly uneasy, I decided to have a frank conversation with Lisa. I approached her with the diary in hand, trying to maintain a calm and composed demeanor. I expressed my concerns about the diary and asked her directly if she had been keeping track of my activities. Lisa's reaction was a mix of surprise and discomfort. She denied any involvement and insisted that she had no knowledge of the diary. Despite her denial, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I decided to enhance the security around my home, installing motion detectors and cameras to ensure that I could monitor any unusual activity. I also began to limit the personal information I shared, both with Lisa and with other acquaintances, to protect my privacy. As the weeks went by, Lisa's behavior became more erratic. She avoided eye contact and seemed increasingly withdrawn whenever we interacted. It was as if the confrontation had made her uncomfortable, and the once friendly exchanges turned into strained pleasantries. I continued to monitor my surroundings, taking precautions to ensure my privacy and safety. The situation eventually settled down, with Lisa becoming less involved in my life. The diary remained a haunting reminder of the invasion of my privacy. While I never received a clear explanation or resolution to the situation, I took the experience as a stark lesson in the importance of safeguarding personal information and being vigilant about who has access to it. In the end, the ordeal left me more cautious and aware of the need to protect my privacy. The friendly neighbor who had once seemed so welcoming became a symbol of the complexities and potential risks of personal boundaries. The experience reinforced the importance of trust and the need to be vigilant about who we let into our lives. Though the immediate threat seemed to have subsided, the impact of the invasion lingered, shaping my approach to privacy and interpersonal relationships in the future. Story 4. It all started one quiet night in early spring. The moonlight was gently filtering through the curtains, casting a soft glow in my bedroom as I drifted off to sleep. I had been feeling unusually relaxed, having wrapped up a particularly demanding week at work. Just as I was about to fall into a deep sleep, the shrill sound of my phone ringing pierced the silence. Groggily, I fumbled for my phone, squinting at the screen. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. I hesitated for a moment, but curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. A deep, distorted voice on the other end was the first thing I heard. The voice was laden with an unsettling calmness, and the words it spoke were even more disturbing. "I see you're watching your favorite show right now," the voice said. "It must be nice to unwind after such a long day." I was stunned into silence. At that hour, I was indeed watching TV, catching up on a show I enjoyed. I hadn't mentioned this routine to anyone recently, not even my closest friends. The eerie specificity of the caller's knowledge made my skin crawl. I tried to respond, but before I could say anything, the line went dead. Heart racing, I tried to shake off the disquieting call, telling myself it was a wrong number or a prank. I went back to sleep, but the peace didn't last long. The phone rang again, and again it was the same distorted voice, now discussing more personal details. It knew about my recent argument with a colleague, the upcoming family gathering, and even my car's make and model. The caller's familiarity with my life was deeply unsettling, and I found it hard to ignore. The next few nights followed a similar pattern. Each time, the calls came at odd hours, always in the dead of night. The voice seemed to know intimate details about my life, my weekend plans, the restaurant I was thinking of trying, and even private conversations I had with family members. Each call left me increasingly unnerved and on edge. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I decided to take action. I contacted my phone service provider to see if they could trace the calls. They assured me they would look into it, but warned that it might take some time. In the meantime, I began documenting every call, noting down the time, the content of the conversations, and the caller's distorted voice. As days passed, the phone calls continued, and their content grew even more personal. The caller began referencing my past experiences, my childhood home, an old friend I hadn't seen in years, and even my recent job change. It felt as though my entire life was being scrutinized by someone who had an unnervingly detailed knowledge of my every move. I decided to enhance my personal security. I installed additional locks on my doors, set up security cameras around my home, and changed my phone number. I even consulted with a security expert to ensure that there were no vulnerabilities in my home or digital life that could be exploited. Despite these precautions, the calls persisted, and the caller's access to my personal information remained a mystery. In an effort to find out who was behind the disturbing calls, I contacted the police. They took the matter seriously and began an investigation. The detectives were able to obtain a court order to trace the calls, and after a few weeks of intense scrutiny, they managed to track the source to a local area. However, the breakthrough didn't immediately lead to an arrest. The investigation revealed that the calls were being made from a public payphone, a location that was nearly impossible to trace back to a specific individual without further clues. The anonymity of the payphone made it challenging to identify the caller, but the police continued to investigate. As the weeks turned into months, the frequency of the calls began to diminish, and eventually they stopped altogether. The investigation continued, but the trail had gone cold. The unsettling experience had left a significant impact on me, and I struggled to reclaim a sense of normalcy in my life. The sense of violation and fear lingered long after the calls ceased. I continued to take precautions to safeguard my privacy, remaining vigilant about my personal security and aware of my surroundings. I also sought counseling to help process the emotional toll of the experience and to regain a sense of control. The calls had been a disturbing reminder of how vulnerable one's personal life can be, and the lengths to which someone might go to invade that privacy. The experience had taught me the importance of taking proactive steps to protect oneself and to remain vigilant against potential threats. Though the calls eventually stopped, the impact of the experience was profound. I became more cautious about sharing personal information and more aware of the potential risks associated with modern technology. The ordeal underscored the importance of safeguarding personal privacy and the need to seek help and support when faced with such invasions. In the end, while the immediate danger had passed, the experience had left a lasting imprint on my sense of security. It served as a stark reminder of the complexities of modern life and the critical need to remain vigilant and proactive in protecting one's personal boundaries. Story 5. It started subtly. I had always prided myself on maintaining an organized and orderly apartment. Everything had its place, and I took comfort in the neatness of my surroundings. However, over the past few weeks, I began to notice something peculiar. Whenever I returned home, there were small but noticeable changes in the way my belongings were arranged. At first, it was minor, and items slightly shifted from its usual spot. A drawer that wasn't closed all the way. I brushed it off as my own forgetfulness. Perhaps I had moved something without realizing it or hadn't closed a drawer properly. But as the days went by, these changes became more frequent and noticeable. I started to wonder if my apartment was somehow less secure than I had thought. One evening, I returned home after a long day at work, feeling particularly exhausted. I noticed that my desk chair was out of place, facing a different direction than usual. I shrugged it off, attributing it to my own absent-mindedness. I put my keys in the bowl by the door, kicked off my shoes, and headed to the kitchen to prepare dinner. It wasn't until later that night, while I was searching for a specific document in my desk drawer, that I made a chilling discovery. Nestled among my papers was a small, folded note. The handwriting was neat and precise, written in a way that sent an immediate shiver down my spine. The note read, "I know when you're gone." My heart raced as I read the message, each word feeling like a chilling accusation. Who could have written this? The note was unnervingly specific, suggesting that someone had been monitoring my comings and goings with a level of detail that was deeply unsettling. I immediately began to review the recent changes in my apartment. I checked the locks on the doors and windows, ensuring they were secure. I rifled through my belongings, trying to see if anything was missing or tampered with. Everything seemed to be in place, but the feeling of unease lingered. I knew I had to take action. The next morning, I contacted a locksmith to upgrade the security on my apartment. I had new, more secure locks installed on all the doors and windows. I also added a few extra security measures, such as a peephole camera and a motion detector for the front entrance. I hoped these changes would provide some peace of mind and deter any potential intruders. Despite these efforts, the anxiety continued to gnaw at me. I found myself constantly second-guessing my routine. I would double-check the locks before leaving, and I started to question every unfamiliar noise or shadow in the hallway. The sense of being watched was ever present, and the small changes in my apartment only heightened my paranoia. The situation escalated when I discovered another note in a different drawer, tucked behind a stack of papers. This note was more detailed and even more unsettling than the first. "I see you've made some changes. It's not enough. I know when you leave and when you return. I'm always watching." The realization that someone had been observing me so closely, even noting the changes I had made to improve my security, left me feeling helpless and terrified. It was clear that the person responsible was not only intruding into my space, but was also thoroughly familiar with my habits and responses. I decided to involve the authorities. I reported the notes and the suspicious activity to the local police, providing them with the evidence I had gathered. The officers took the notes for analysis and began an investigation. They conducted a thorough examination of my apartment and spoke with my neighbors to see if they had noticed anything unusual. The police reassured me that they would do their best to find out who was responsible for the intrusion. They suggested that I continue to be vigilant and to document any further incidents. The investigation, however, seemed to move slowly, and the constant uncertainty left me on edge. I also took steps to improve my own awareness and security. I began keeping a detailed log of my activities, noting when I left and returned home. I started paying closer attention to my surroundings, trying to identify any patterns or suspicious behavior. I even reached out to a private security consultant for additional advice on how to safeguard my apartment. Weeks passed, and the sense of violation continued to weigh heavily on me. I had become hyper-aware of every detail in my environment, constantly on the lookout for any sign of intrusion. Despite my efforts to enhance security and monitor my surroundings, the psychological toll of the situation was significant. The notes had not only breached my physical space, but had also deeply affected my sense of safety and comfort. One night, after returning from a brief trip, I noticed something different. The front door was slightly ajar, just enough to make my heart race. I stepped inside cautiously, my mind racing with fear and dread. As I surveyed the apartment, I found nothing missing or out of place. The locks were still secure, and the security system was intact. In the days that followed, I received no new notes, and the police continued their investigation without any new leads. The situation had become a tense waiting game, with the feeling of being watched lingering in the background. Though the immediate threat seemed to have receded, the experience had left a lasting impact on my sense of security and well-being. The intrusion had exposed vulnerabilities I had never imagined, and the note served as a constant reminder of the fragility of personal privacy. Despite the efforts to restore a sense of normalcy, the fear and anxiety remained, a testament to the deep and unsettling impact of having one's private space so profoundly violated. Story 6. It was an ordinary Saturday morning, and I had decided to spend the day organizing the attic. The space had become a catch-all for old furniture, forgotten boxes, and various knickknacks that had accumulated over the years. I had been putting off this task for too long, and with a free weekend ahead, I figured it was finally time to tackle it. The attic was a dusty, dimly lit space with low beams and uneven flooring. I pulled down a stepladder and climbed up to reach some of the higher shelves. As I moved a particularly heavy box marked old clothes, I noticed a loose panel in the wall behind it. Curious, I pried the panel open, revealing a small, hidden compartment that had clearly been concealed for some time. My heart quickened as I peered inside. The compartment was surprisingly spacious and lined with an old, faded wallpaper. I reached in and pulled out a few items, my mind racing with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The first item I retrieved was a stack of photographs, carefully arranged and secured with a rubber band. As I examined them, a sense of dread began to creep over me. The photos were of myself and my family, taken from various angles and at different times. There were pictures of us in our backyard, at local parks, and even some taken inside our home. Each photo was a candid shot, capturing moments that were supposed to be private. The images were clear and well composed, suggesting that whoever had taken them had used a decent camera and had been quite methodical. I flipped through the stack, my hands trembling. The more I looked, the more unsettling it became. There were pictures of us celebrating birthdays, attending family gatherings, and even a few snapshots of mundane activities like sitting at the kitchen table or watching TV. It was as if someone had been following us, documenting our lives without our knowledge. In addition to the photographs, the compartment contained a small notebook. The cover was worn and the pages were yellowed with age. I opened it cautiously, and inside I found detailed notes about our daily routines. The notes described specific times when we left the house, who visited us, and even mentioned our interactions with neighbors. The level of detail was meticulous, and it was clear that someone had been monitoring us closely. I felt a wave of nausea. The realization that someone had been watching and recording our private lives was deeply disturbing. I quickly gathered the photographs and notebook and decided to confront the situation head-on. I needed to understand who had been responsible for this invasion of privacy and why they had done it. I called my family together, and with a sense of dread, I explained what I had discovered. Their reactions were a mix of shock, fear, and disbelief. We all sat together, trying to piece together the implications of the hidden compartment and the photos. My wife was particularly distressed, struggling to comprehend how someone could have accessed our home and taken such intimate pictures. We decided to contact the authorities. The police arrived at our home and carefully examined the compartment, taking the photographs and notebook into evidence. They conducted a thorough search of the attic to ensure that there were no other hidden compartments or signs of tampering. The officer in charge assured us that they would investigate the matter thoroughly and attempt to trace the source of the photos and send notes. As we waited for the investigation to unfold, we took additional measures to secure our home. We installed new locks on all doors and windows and added motion-activated security cameras around the property. The sense of violation was profound, and we wanted to ensure that our home was once again a safe and secure place for our family. The police interviewed us about any potential suspects or recent interactions that might explain the intrusion. We provided them with as much information as we could, but we were at a loss as to who could have been responsible. The investigation involved examining the photos for any identifiable clues, analyzing the notebook for patterns, and trying to determine how someone could have gained access to our home without our knowledge. Weeks passed, and while the police kept us updated on their progress, no significant leads emerged. The investigation continued, but the trail remained cold. We were left with a lingering sense of unease and heightened awareness of our surroundings. The experience had fundamentally altered our perception of privacy and safety. Despite the lack of concrete answers, the ordeal had strengthened our resolve to protect our personal space and to remain vigilant. We became more cautious about who we allowed into our home and took extra precautions to safeguard our privacy. The incident had served as a stark reminder of the importance of being proactive in securing one's environment and being aware of potential threats. As time went on, we gradually began to rebuild our sense of normalcy. We learned to cope with the lingering anxiety and worked to restore our confidence in our home. The experience had been traumatic, but it had also brought us closer as a family, reinforcing our commitment to each other and to ensuring our safety. The hidden compartment in the photographs remained a haunting memory, a reminder of the vulnerability that can accompany modern life. While the investigation had not yielded the answers we had hoped for, the support of friends, family, and law enforcement had helped us navigate the difficult situation. In the end, the experience taught us valuable lessons about resilience and the importance of safeguarding one's privacy. We continued to be vigilant and proactive, always aware of the need to protect ourselves and our loved ones from unforeseen threats. The ordeal had been a challenging and unsettling chapter in our lives, but it had ultimately strengthened our resolve to face adversity with courage and determination. Story 7. The road trip had started with the excitement of adventure and the freedom of the open road. I had planned this trip for months, mapping out scenic routes, choosing interesting stops, and imagining the thrill of exploration. The journey was supposed to be a relaxing escape from the daily grind, a chance to recharge and find inspiration. The first few days of the trip had gone smoothly. I reveled in the picturesque landscapes, quaint towns, and the simple joy of being on the move. But as I ventured deeper into less populated areas, the road grew quieter and the scenery more rugged. I felt a sense of isolation, but it was a peaceful solitude that I had anticipated. On the fourth day, as I drove through a particularly remote stretch of highway, my car began to sputter and lose power. I pulled over to the side of the road, hoping it was a minor issue that I could resolve with a quick fix. After checking under the hood and inspecting the engine, I realized that the problem was more serious than I had hoped. The engine had overheated, and it was clear that I wouldn't be able to continue driving. With no cell phone signal and no immediate help in sight, I set up my car as best as I could. I put out my emergency warning triangles and attempted to call for roadside assistance, but the lack of signal rendered those efforts futile. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the remote area was engulfed in darkness. The isolation became more palpable as the temperature dropped, and the peaceful solitude transformed into a feeling of vulnerability. I tried to keep my spirits up, knowing that help would eventually arrive. I took out a flashlight, checked the car's manual again, and prepared to wait. The silence of the night was occasionally broken by the distant sound of wildlife, but otherwise it was eerily quiet. I decided to sit in the car to stay warm, and I pulled out my phone to see if there was any chance of a signal. Just as I was starting to lose hope, my phone buzzed with a new text message. I had been receiving sporadic messages throughout the trip, mostly from friends and family checking in, but this one was different. The message was from an unknown number, and as I opened it, a chill ran down my spine. The message contained a single image and a brief, unsettling text. The photo showed my car, broken down on the side of the road, taken from an angle that suggested the sender was nearby, but not visible in the image. The text accompanying the photo was terse and menacing. "You shouldn't have come here. You're not alone. Leave the car and start walking if you want to survive the night." My heart raced as I processed the message. The realization that someone had been watching me, and possibly even following me, was terrifying. My immediate instinct was to lock the car doors and scan the surroundings for any signs of movement. The darkness outside was impenetrable, and the dense trees and underbrush seemed to conceal unknown threats. I considered my options. The idea of leaving the car and walking in the dark without any clear destination or knowledge of the area was fraught with dangers. On the other hand, staying put might leave me vulnerable if the sender was indeed nearby and had sinister intentions. Desperation set in as I tried to think through the situation. I attempted to call 911, but again, the lack of signal rendered this effort useless. I weighed my options and decided that my best course of action was to stay in the car and wait for morning, hoping that daylight would bring a sense of safety and potentially a signal for help. In the meantime, I considered reaching out to local authorities through any online channels available. I used my phone to draft a message to the nearest police department, describing my location and the nature of the threat. I hoped that someone might receive the message and dispatch a search party or send help. As the night dragged on, the fear and anxiety became almost unbearable. I stayed vigilant, periodically checking the area outside the car and scanning for any signs of movement. The shadows of the trees seemed to shift, and every rustle in the underbrush made me jump. Eventually, I tried to keep my mind occupied by focusing on the positive aspects of the situation. I reminded myself that I had taken all the necessary precautions for safety, and that the likelihood of someone actually being out there to harm me was low. Still, the fear lingered, and the isolation felt more intense with each passing hour. With the first light of dawn, I felt a small sense of relief. I could see the surrounding landscape more clearly and hoped that the visibility would make it easier to spot any potential threats or passing vehicles. I used the daylight to assess the car's condition once more, but it was clear that it would need professional help to be repaired. At around mid-morning, a vehicle finally appeared on the horizon. The sight of another car approaching was a beacon of hope. I flagged it down, and the driver stopped to offer assistance. The driver was a local who was familiar with the area and kindly agreed to help me get the car towed to a nearby service station. I explained the situation to the driver, including the threatening message I had received. He listened attentively and assured me that he would report the incident to the local authorities. The police were notified, and a patrol was dispatched to investigate the area where I had been stranded. The authorities took the threatening message seriously and conducted a thorough investigation. They were able to find no immediate signs of a person lurking in the vicinity, but they increased patrols in the area and advised me to be cautious in the future. The entire experience left a lasting impact on me. It was a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities associated with traveling in remote areas and the potential dangers that can arise. I was grateful for the help I received and the resolution of the immediate threat, but the fear of being watched and the unsettling message continued to haunt me. In the end, the road trip that was supposed to be a relaxing getaway became an ordeal of fear and anxiety. It taught me the importance of staying vigilant and prepared, even in seemingly peaceful and remote locations. The sense of isolation and vulnerability had been overwhelming, but the kindness of strangers and the support of authorities provided a glimmer of hope in a frightening situation. Story 8. The excitement of moving into a new house was quickly overshadowed by an unsettling discovery. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to put down roots and create a home filled with new memories. But as I settled into my new surroundings, I stumbled upon something that would cast a long shadow over my sense of security. The attic had always been a bit of a mystery. It was a large, dusty space filled with old boxes and forgotten belongings from previous occupants. On the day of the move, I had decided to explore the attic, thinking it would be a good idea to clear out the clutter before I started organizing my own things. I had barely made it up the creaky wooden stairs when a peculiar feeling of unease settled over me. I tried to shake it off, attributing it to the stress of the move. As I began sorting through the boxes, I came across a stack of old letters, their edges yellowed with age. The envelopes were unmarked, but they were bound together with a frayed piece of twine. Curious, I carefully untied the string and began to read the letters. The first few letters were written in neat, looping handwriting, but the content was anything but ordinary. The letters detailed the previous owner's obsession with the house, and more disturbingly, with the people who lived in it. The writer had meticulously documented every aspect of their observations. They described watching from hidden vantage points, noting the times the occupants came and went, and even detailing their private conversations. As I read through the letters, a sense of dread began to creep in. The writer had clearly gone to great lengths to monitor the previous occupants' lives. They had described the comings and goings of people with an unsettling precision, referencing specific details such as the exact times when the house was empty or when certain activities took place. There were references to hidden cameras and secret viewing spots in the house, adding a new layer of horror to the already disturbing content. One letter detailed the writer's fascination with the occupants' daily routines. They described how they would wait until the house was quiet before sneaking around and observing. There were mentions of hidden compartments and secret notes, suggesting that the writer had created a complex system for tracking their subjects. The tone of the letters was both obsessive and sinister, reflecting a deep-seated fixation on the idea of surveillance. My heart raced as I continued reading. The letters were filled with unnerving details about the previous occupants' personal lives. They included descriptions of private moments from family gatherings to personal conversations that had clearly been overheard. The writer's fascination with their subjects bordered on the pathological, and their obsession was palpable in every word. One letter was particularly chilling. It described a plan to continue the surveillance with the new occupants of the house. The writer expressed excitement about the prospect of observing a new family, detailing how they had prepared hidden cameras and other equipment to ensure they could continue their intrusive monitoring. The letter concluded with a disquieting message: "I can't wait to see what secrets you'll reveal." The more I read, the more my sense of security eroded. The idea that someone had gone to such lengths to invade the privacy of the house's previous occupants was deeply disturbing. It made me question everything about the house. Had I unknowingly walked into a situation where my own privacy would be compromised? I decided to contact the police, hoping they could offer some assistance. I showed them the letters and explained my concerns. The officers were concerned but also skeptical. They conducted an initial investigation, but with no immediate evidence of ongoing surveillance or any indication that the previous owner had left behind any monitoring equipment. They were unable to take further action. They advised me to be vigilant and to continue checking for any unusual activity. In the meantime, I took steps to ensure my privacy and security. I had a professional security company come to the house to check for hidden cameras or any other surveillance. The inspection revealed nothing out of the ordinary, but the process did little to ease my anxiety. I changed the locks, installed security cameras, and made sure all windows and doors were securely locked at all times. Despite these measures, the sense of unease lingered. The letters had left an indelible mark on my sense of safety. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, constantly on edge and worried about the possibility of someone watching or listening. I avoided discussing personal matters within the house and became more cautious about who I allowed inside. As weeks went by, the fear that had taken root began to fade, but the impact of the discovery remained. The letters had served as a stark reminder of the potential for invasion of privacy and the lengths to which people might go to satisfy their obsessions. I had learned to live with a heightened sense of vigilance, but I also sought to reclaim my sense of normalcy. I focused on making the house my home, finding comfort in creating a space that was both secure and welcoming. The experience had been a harrowing one, but it also reinforced my resolve to protect my privacy and security. The unsettling discovery in the attic had tested my resilience, but it also strengthened my awareness and preparedness for safeguarding my personal space. In the end, the letters served as a chilling reminder of the vulnerabilities we face in our own homes. They had revealed a disturbing chapter in the house's history, but they also highlighted the importance of remaining vigilant and proactive in protecting our personal privacy. The ordeal had been unsettling, but it had ultimately reinforced my commitment to creating a safe and secure environment for myself and my family. Story 9. It was a crisp autumn morning, and I decided to treat myself to a coffee from a local cafe I had heard good things about. The place was known for its artisanal brews and cozy atmosphere, perfect for unwinding and enjoying a quiet moment. I had passed by it numerous times, but had never stopped in until that day. The cafe had a warm, inviting charm with its rustic wooden furniture and the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee beans filling the air. I entered with a sense of anticipation, looking forward to a relaxing coffee break. The cafe wasn't crowded, and I chose a seat by the window where I could watch the world outside while enjoying my drink. I noticed a few other patrons scattered around, lost in their own worlds with books or laptops. As I settled into my seat, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. My instincts were on high alert for reasons I couldn't quite pinpoint. Perhaps it was the sensation of being watched, or the unusual quiet that seemed to envelop the space. But I brushed it off as paranoia and focused on ordering my coffee. After placing my order, I waited near the counter. The barista, a young woman with a friendly demeanor, called out my name when my drink was ready. I picked it up and thanked her, noting that she seemed to be working with a brisk efficiency, but nothing out of the ordinary. I took my coffee back to my seat, hoping to lose myself in the comfort of the cafe's ambience. As I sipped my coffee and glanced around the room, I noticed someone sitting in a corner, partially obscured by shadows. They seemed to be watching me intently. I couldn't make out their face clearly, but their presence was disconcerting. I tried to ignore the feeling and concentrate on my coffee, but the sense of being observed persisted. When it was time to leave, I made my way to the counter to settle the bill. The barista was behind the register, and I handed her my credit card. As she processed the payment, I glanced around the cafe once more, catching sight of the figure in the corner who now seemed to be observing me even more intently. The disquiet I felt was now a full-blown sense of unease. The barista handed me my receipt with a small smile. As I took it, my eyes fell on the printed message, and a shiver ran down my spine. Scrawled in neat handwriting beneath the total was a note that read, "I've been waiting for you." My name was also printed at the top of the receipt, confirming that the message was directed specifically at me. I felt a rush of anxiety and confusion. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of the message. Who could have sent it? What did it mean? I looked back at the figure in the corner, but they were no longer there. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to piece together the situation. I quickly left the cafe, my mind still reeling from the encounter. Outside, the crisp air did little to calm my nerves. I walked briskly to my car, feeling a growing sense of urgency to get away from the area. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, although every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw nothing out of the ordinary. When I arrived home, I locked the door behind me and sat down to collect my thoughts. The receipt was still in my hand, and I stared at the message, trying to decipher its meaning. I wasn't expecting any visitors or have any known issues with anyone that would warrant such a message. The whole experience was unnerving, and I struggled to make sense of it. I decided to contact the local authorities and report the incident, sharing the details of what had happened and providing them with the receipt. They took my report seriously and assured me they would look into it. They advised me to be cautious and to report any further unusual behavior or messages. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of paranoia. I kept my windows and doors securely locked and was extra vigilant about my surroundings. I avoided going back to the cafe, opting instead for other places where I felt safer. The cafe's cozy charm had been replaced by an unsettling sense of dread. The authorities conducted a follow-up investigation, checking the security footage from the cafe and interviewing the staff. They also spoke to other patrons who had been there around the same time. The investigation was thorough but yielded no immediate answers. The figure in the corner had left no trace, and the barista's explanation provided little insight into who might have sent the message. As the weeks went by, the mystery of the message remained unsolved. I continued to be cautious and made a point to keep a low profile. The experience had left me with a heightened sense of awareness and an understanding of the importance of trusting one's instincts. Although the authorities were unable to resolve the case completely, their investigation reassured me that the matter had been taken seriously. I learned to approach unfamiliar situations with a greater degree of caution and to be mindful of the potential for unexpected encounters. The incident at the cafe had a lasting impact on me, serving as a reminder of the need to remain vigilant and the importance of taking precautionary measures when faced with unsettling or ambiguous situations. While the exact reason behind the message remained a mystery, the experience taught me to value personal safety and the importance of being aware of one's surroundings. Story 10. It began on an ordinary Tuesday, with the usual flurry of mail and packages arriving at my doorstep. I had just returned from work, carrying a heavy briefcase and a stack of papers. As I fumbled with my keys, I noticed a small, unmarked package resting on the doormat. It was plain brown, with no return address or identifying marks, just my name typed neatly on the label. A chill ran down my spine as I picked it up. The simplicity of the package contrasted sharply with the feeling of unease it provoked. I shrugged off the discomfort, attributing it to the stress of a long day. I set the package on the kitchen counter and decided to open it later. After dinner, I finally found the courage to investigate. With a sense of trepidation, I sliced through the tape and peeled away the brown paper. Inside was a collection of items that left me both confused and unsettled. Among them were a pair of vintage sunglasses, a small ornate box containing what looked like a piece of costume jewelry, and an old photograph of a couple I did not recognize. The photograph was faded and sepia-toned, depicting two people standing in front of a house that was unfamiliar to me. I scanned the contents again, hoping to find something that might explain the origins of these items, but there was nothing. No note, no explanation, just these strange objects. I felt a growing sense of discomfort. Where had these items come from, and why had they been sent to me? I placed the items aside and tried to focus on my work, but the mystery of the package lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched or that someone knew something about me that I didn't understand. I reported the package to the local police, explaining that I had received it without a return address and that the items inside were unfamiliar. The officer assured me that they would look into it, but cautioned me that, unless there was a direct threat, it might be difficult to trace the package's origins. Days passed, and the odd deliveries continued. Each new package was different, containing more items that I didn't recognize. A collection of old postcards from a city I had never visited, a worn-out diary with entries in a language I didn't understand, and a set of keys with a label that didn't match any locks in my house. Every package arrived with the same lack of return address and the same unnerving sense of mystery. One package contained an old-fashioned locket with a photograph of a child inside. The child's face was vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place where I had seen it before. Another package held a stack of handwritten letters in a script that seemed oddly familiar but was in a language I couldn't identify. The letters were filled with personal details that seemed too specific to be random. They mentioned events and places I had no connection to. The recurring theme of these items, their personal nature, and the absence of any explanation left me increasingly on edge. I began to worry that someone was trying to send me a message or was playing some kind of game with me. I also began to worry about my own safety, fearing that this was an elaborate ruse to get me to lower my guard. In addition to my calls to the police, I started conducting my own investigation. I reached out to local antique shops, asking if anyone had recognized the items I had received. I also contacted friends and family, showing them the items in the photograph, hoping someone might have information or insight. One evening, while reviewing the contents of a particularly troubling package, a collection of old keys, a rusty lock, and a small notebook with cryptic notes, I stumbled upon a clue that made my blood run cold. The notebook contained a list of addresses, one of which was eerily close to my own. Next to the address was a scrawled note, "The final piece is near." The note was disjointed and unsettling, adding a new layer of anxiety to the mystery. I showed the note to the police, who took it seriously and promised to investigate further. They began checking the addresses listed in the notebook and conducting interviews with anyone who might have information about the packages. Meanwhile, I took additional security measures, installing more locks and security cameras around my home. I also kept a detailed log of each package and its contents, hoping to find a pattern or clue that might help in identifying the sender. As the investigation continued, the frequency of the packages slowed down, but the sense of unease remained. The police were able to trace the packages to a shipping center in a neighboring city, but the trail grew cold there. The sender's identity remained a mystery, and the motivation behind the packages was unclear. The packages eventually stopped arriving, but the impact of the experience lingered. I had been forced to confront the vulnerability of my personal space and the unsettling reality of being watched and manipulated. The items, while eventually deemed harmless, had left me with a deep sense of discomfort and a heightened awareness of my surroundings. In the aftermath, I took steps to reclaim a sense of normalcy. I focused on strengthening my home security and became more cautious about my interactions and privacy. The experience had served as a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance and the need to protect oneself from potential threats. The mystery of the packages remained unsolved, a haunting reminder of the unknown forces that can intrude into our lives. While the immediate danger had passed, the experience had left an indelible mark on my sense of security and trust. The unsettling mystery of the packages had revealed the fragile boundaries of personal privacy and the lengths to which someone could go to breach those boundaries. Story 11. The snowfall began gently, covering the suburban streets in a pristine white blanket that made everything seem serene and calm. It was the kind of snowfall that turned the mundane into something magical, as if the world had been dipped in a layer of purity. For Laura, however, the enchantment quickly faded into something thinner. It all started with the footprints. They appeared one morning, crisscrossing through her front yard and extending up to her porch. Laura initially brushed it off as the work of neighborhood kids. But as the days went on, she began to notice other oddities. Whispers floated through the cold air, barely audible but unmistakably present. They seemed to swirl around her house, weaving through the trees and settling uncomfortably near her windows. Laura tried to convince herself it was her imagination, or perhaps the wind playing tricks. But then she noticed that the footprints continued to appear in the same patterns, and the whispers grew more distinct, as if someone was trying to communicate with her. The sense of being watched became almost palpable. One evening, Laura found herself unable to sleep, tossing and turning under the heavy weight of unease. She decided to take a walk around her property to clear her mind. The snow crunched softly beneath her boots as she stepped outside. The moonlight cast long shadows, making the night seem even more eerie. She was almost at peace with the stillness when she heard a faint, yet unmistakable sound of a door creaking open. Her heart pounded as she glanced towards her neighbor's house, a modest, two-story home that had always seemed unremarkable. It was dark, with no lights on. Laura's gut told her that something was wrong. The whispers were now accompanied by a low, unsettling hum that seemed to emanate from that direction. The next day, Laura decided she had had enough. She called the police and reported her concerns. They took down her statement with polite skepticism, but they agreed to check things out. It wasn't long before they returned with troubling news. "We've done some digging into your neighbor's background," one of the officers said, his face grave. "It turns out he has a history of disturbing behavior. He's been under surveillance for a while due to previous incidents." Laura's blood ran cold. "What kind of incidents?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Various offenses," the officer continued. "But what's most concerning is that he's been known to stalk and intimidate people before. There's evidence suggesting he might have been involved in more serious activities, but it's all under investigation." Laura felt a shiver run down her spine. Everything began to make sense in a horrifying way. The footprints, the whispers, they were all part of a pattern she hadn't fully understood until now. The police advised her to stay alert and to contact them immediately if she noticed anything else unusual. Determined to uncover the full extent of her neighbor's activities, Laura began to delve deeper. She observed the neighbor's house from her window, noting every movement. There were times when she saw him standing in the dark, watching her house with an intensity that made her skin crawl. One night, as the snow continued to fall, Laura heard the whispers again, this time louder and more urgent. She decided to investigate further, feeling a strange mixture of fear and resolve. Armed with a flashlight and her phone, she approached her neighbor's house, treading carefully through the snow. The front door was slightly ajar, and a sense of dread settled over her. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was dark and silent, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing unsettling details, a collection of photographs pinned to the wall, showing her own house from various angles. It was clear that her neighbor had been watching her for some time. Laura's hand shook as she took photos of the evidence, determined to use them to protect herself. Just then, she heard a noise behind her. Turning swiftly, she saw her neighbor standing in the doorway, his expression a mix of anger and surprise. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice cold and menacing. Laura's heart raced, but she managed to stay composed. "I'm calling the police," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. She turned and fled, racing back to her house with adrenaline surging through her veins. The police arrived quickly, arresting the neighbor and securing the scene. Laura felt a mixture of relief and lingering dread. The house was now under investigation, and the neighbor would face charges for his actions. Laura's life slowly returned to normal, but the experience had left a lasting impact. The whispers and footprints were gone, replaced by a cautious vigilance. The ultimate lesson she learned was the importance of trust and awareness. The neighbor's unsettling presence was a harsh reminder of the dark undercurrents that can lurk behind seemingly ordinary facades. Story 12. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dilapidated landscape, we gathered outside the rusted gates of the abandoned hospital. Our group of 4 had always been drawn to the thrill of the unknown, and tonight was no different. The hospital had been closed for decades, its darkened windows and crumbling facade whispering tales of a bygone era. Despite the warnings from locals about strange occurrences, our curiosity pushed us forward. The gate creaked open with a groan, and we stepped into the overgrown courtyard. The once pristine garden was now a tangled mess of weeds and vines. We exchanged nervous glances but pressed on, the promise of adventure outweighing our trepidation. The main entrance was boarded up, but a side door, barely hanging on its hinges, beckoned us. Inside, the hospital was a labyrinth of decay. Dust hung thick in the air, and the stench of mold was overpowering. Our flashlights pierced the darkness, revealing peeling wallpaper and broken furniture scattered haphazardly. We joked to mask our unease, but the oppressive silence was unnerving. Each room we entered seemed to be a snapshot of the past: old wheelchairs abandoned mid-use, faded medical charts, and rusting surgical tools. The atmosphere was thick with the weight of forgotten memories. We decided to split up to cover more ground. I wandered into what appeared to be an old patient ward. Rows of empty beds lined the room, and I could almost hear the echoes of hospital staff and patients from long ago. As I approached a corner where a large, dusty mirror hung crookedly on the wall, I noticed something strange. The reflection seemed slightly off, as though the room behind me was distorted. Shaking off the eerie feeling, I moved on, but the image lingered in my mind. Meanwhile, my friends had discovered a staircase leading to the basement. Their voices echoed through the halls, their excitement palpable. I joined them, feeling an odd sense of foreboding. The stairs creaked under our weight, and the air grew colder with each step. The basement was a stark contrast to the upper floors. The walls were lined with old storage shelves, filled with forgotten medical supplies and dusty records. In the dim light, we noticed a door at the far end of the basement. It was partially ajar, revealing a dimly lit room beyond. We hesitated before pushing the door open. Inside, the room was filled with old, rusted equipment and strange contraptions. But what caught our attention was a single, large, dusty book lying on a table in the center of the room. The book's cover was worn, and it looked as though it hadn't been touched in years. Curiosity got the better of us, and we carefully opened the book. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, diagrams, and what appeared to be patient records. The more we delved into it, the more unsettling it became. Some of the entries described experiments that seemed to cross ethical boundaries. One entry, in particular, stood out. It mentioned an experimental procedure involving mind perception intended to explore altered states of consciousness. A cold shiver ran down my spine. The atmosphere in the room seemed to shift. I glanced at my friends, their faces pale and wide-eyed. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the basement. We all jumped, our hearts racing. The door we had entered through slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls. Panic set in as we realized we were trapped. Desperation drove us to search for another exit. We pounded on the door, shouting for help, but the sound of our voices was swallowed by the oppressive silence. The temperature dropped further, and a strange, whispering noise seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The shadows around us twisted and danced, making it difficult to distinguish reality from illusion. As we huddled together, trying to stay calm, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. The mirror-like distortion I had seen earlier seemed to be reappearing in the basement. It was as though the room itself was warping and shifting. My friends were visibly shaken, their fear palpable. We tried to make sense of what was happening, but it felt as though the very fabric of reality was unraveling. After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open on its own. We stumbled out, our nerves frayed and our minds racing. The basement was no longer as we had left it. It seemed even more decrepit and unsettling. We hurried up the stairs, the oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly with each step. The main entrance was still accessible, and we burst through the door into the cool night air. We didn't speak much as we made our way back to the car. The experience had left us questioning our own sanity. The abandoned hospital was no longer just a place of decay. It had become a tangible reminder of the unknown and the unsettling. Our once thrilling adventure had turned into a haunting experience that none of us would forget. As we drove away, the hospital loomed in the distance, its dark windows seeming to watch us, holding on to the secrets we had barely begun to uncover. Story 13. I was always the type of person who valued my privacy deeply, yet I found myself grappling with a creeping sense of unease that I couldn't quite place. It began subtly, a feeling that something was slightly off whenever I walked through my front door. My home, once my sanctuary, began to feel like a space invaded by unseen eyes. The usual comfort of my living space was now marred by an inexplicable tension. At first, I brushed it off as paranoia. Maybe it was just the stress of a hectic job or the strain of personal issues that were making me overly sensitive. As the weeks passed, however, my unease grew. It wasn't just the small, inexplicable noises I heard at odd hours, or the way objects seemed to be slightly out of place. It was more than that. I started to notice that my routine seemed to be subtly altered. My favorite coffee cup would be in a different spot, or the TV remote would be on the opposite side of the couch. The little changes were innocuous on their own, but when they piled up, they formed an unsettling pattern that gnawed at me. Determined to get to the bottom of my disquiet, I began to scrutinize my surroundings more closely. I started with the obvious places under the couch, behind picture frames, and inside light fixtures, but found nothing unusual. My search seemed fruitless, and with each day, my discomfort intensified. It felt like living under a perpetual cloud of suspicion and dread, and I was desperate for relief. One particularly dreary afternoon, as I was dusting off some shelves in the living room, my hand brushed against something cold and metallic behind a stack of books. I pulled back the books and found a small, inconspicuous device wedged between them. My heart raced as I turned it over in my hands. It was a tiny camera, one I recognized from tech blogs as a high-definition model designed for covert surveillance. My stomach dropped. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. My home was being monitored, and someone I trusted had planted these cameras. I felt a whirlwind of emotion: shock, anger, betrayal. Who could have done this? I searched the house with newfound urgency, tearing through rooms and inspecting every nook and cranny. Hidden cameras were in the most unlikely places, behind vents, inside wall sconces, and even embedded in smoke detectors. Each discovery felt like another stab of betrayal. The very idea that my private moments were being watched and recorded was both horrifying and dehumanizing. The realization that I was under surveillance was only compounded by the fact that someone close to me was behind it. I spent the next few days trying to piece together who could have had the motive and opportunity to invade my privacy so egregiously. It was a process that involved revisiting old relationships and interactions with people who had once been a part of my life. I questioned friends, family, and acquaintances, but no one seemed to offer any plausible explanations. The web of suspicion grew ever more tangled. In the midst of this emotional turmoil, I sought solace in law enforcement. When I reported the invasion of privacy and presented the evidence I had gathered, the police took my case seriously. They conducted their own investigation, which involved tracing the origins of the cameras and analyzing their data. It was a nerve-wracking process, waiting for answers that felt like they might never come. Days turned into weeks, and as the investigation progressed, I found myself grappling with the psychological impact of the invasion. My trust in others was shattered, and I felt like I was living in a world where nothing was as it seemed. The ultimate betrayal had come from someone I once trusted implicitly, and the emotional scars from this experience were deep and lasting. Eventually, the investigation revealed that the cameras had been placed by a former friend who had harbored hidden grievances. Their motives were complex and rooted in a mix of jealousy and unresolved conflicts. The revelation was both a relief and a source of deeper pain. It was a reminder of how betrayal can come from the most unexpected places and how fragile trust can be. The journey to reclaim my sense of safety and normalcy was a long one. I had to rebuild not just my physical space, but also my emotional resilience. Each day was an exercise in learning to trust again, in both myself and others. Though the immediate threat was gone, the experience left an indelible mark on my psyche. My home, once again a place of refuge, now stood as a testament to the ultimate violation of trust and the profound impact of betrayal. Story 14. I had been searching for weeks for the right place to call home, my budget tight and my patience running thin. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I stumbled upon a Craigslist listing that seemed to check all my boxes: affordable rent, decent neighborhood, and a charming little apartment with hardwood floors and a view of the park. I contacted the landlord, who turned out to be a warm and personable woman named Mrs. Sullivan. She was eager to show me the place and mentioned that it had recently become available because the previous tenant had moved out unexpectedly. When I arrived at the apartment, Mrs. Sullivan greeted me with a bright smile and a set of keys. The apartment was as lovely as advertised, with sunlit rooms and a cozy kitchen. The walls were freshly painted, and everything seemed in good order. We went through the standard paperwork, and within a few days I was moving in, thrilled to finally have a space to call my own. The first few weeks were blissful. The apartment was quiet and I was settling into a comfortable routine. Then, as I was unpacking some boxes in the bedroom closet, I found something unusual: a small, dusty box hidden behind the built-in shelves. The box was old, with a worn leather exterior and brass clasps. Curiosity got the better of me and I opened it. Inside, I discovered a collection of old photographs, letters, and various trinkets. The photographs were of a young woman, her face radiating joy and vitality. There were pictures of her in different settings: at the beach, at family gatherings, and with friends. The letters were written in a delicate, flowing script, filled with affectionate messages and personal anecdotes. As I sifted through these items, I noticed that they all had one thing in common: they were addressed to someone named Elizabeth. At first, I thought little of it. Perhaps Elizabeth had just left behind some personal belongings. But then, I found a small journal at the bottom of the box. The leather cover was embossed with intricate designs, and as I opened it, I was struck by the sense of intimacy within its pages. The journal was filled with entries about Elizabeth's life, her hopes, dreams, and fears. She wrote about her struggles with her family, her career aspirations, and a mysterious, unnamed person who seemed to be the love of her life. One entry stood out among the rest. It described an argument Elizabeth had with someone she loved dearly, a fight that seemed to have deeply affected her. She wrote about feeling betrayed and conflicted, and the entry ended abruptly with a sentence that read, "I hope this decision will be the right one." The more I read, the more I felt a pang of unease. There was something hauntingly poignant about the way Elizabeth poured her soul into these pages. It was as if she had left behind a piece of her spirit in this apartment. Days turned into weeks, and my curiosity about Elizabeth's story grew. I asked Mrs. Sullivan about the previous tenant, but she was vague and seemed uncomfortable with the questions. She mentioned only that Elizabeth had been a wonderful tenant who had left in a hurry. I tried to dismiss my growing unease, but the sense that something was amiss lingered. One night, I decided to explore the apartment's old closet. hoping to find some clue about Elizabeth's sudden departure. Behind the stack of boxes and old furniture, I discovered a small door leading to a narrow, hidden space. It was dusty and cramped, but I managed to squeeze inside. In the dim light of my phone, I saw something chilling. The walls of the hidden room were covered in newspaper clippings, photos, and strange symbols. The clippings were mostly about missing persons and unsolved crimes. The photos included a mix of ordinary scenes and disturbing images. Some of them appeared to be taken inside the apartment. As I examined the clippings, I came across a particularly unsettling one, a newspaper article about Elizabeth, reporting her as a missing person. The article was dated several months before she had supposedly moved out. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. How could this be? I returned to the journal, rereading the entries with a growing sense of dread. One entry described Elizabeth's fear of someone stalking her, someone she felt was always watching her. She wrote about finding hidden cameras in her apartment and feeling trapped. The last entry was a desperate plea for help, but it ended with a chilling line, "I don't think I'm safe here anymore." My heart raced as I realized the magnitude of what I had uncovered. The apartment, which had seemed like such a perfect place, now felt like a prison. I contacted the authorities, sharing what I had found. The police investigation that followed revealed that Elizabeth's disappearance was indeed linked to the apartment, and that there had been an ongoing investigation into a series of related incidents. It turned out that Elizabeth had been a victim of a disturbing stalker, someone who had been watching her closely. The hidden room and the newspaper clippings were all part of a twisted game of control and intimidation. I moved out of the apartment as soon as I could, unable to shake the feeling of violation and dread that had settled over me. The experience left me deeply unsettled, and I often think about Elizabeth and the life she had lived in that space. Her story serves as a haunting reminder of the dark undercurrents that can lurk beneath seemingly perfect surfaces. Story 15. The night had settled over the rolling hills like a heavy, oppressive blanket, muffling the distant hum of the city and casting shadows that danced on the edges of my headlights. I had been driving for hours, aiming to escape the familiar confines of urban life and find some solace in the solitude of the countryside. It was supposed to be a quiet getaway, a chance to clear my mind and reconnect with nature. Instead, it became a journey into something far darker than I ever anticipated. The map on my phone had been my guide, though the signal had dwindled to nothingness long before I lost the asphalt and found myself on a narrow, winding road that seemed to have no end. I glanced at the dashboard clock and sighed, realizing that I should have reached my destination by now. The road, barely wide enough for my car, twisted and turned through dense forest, the trees pressing in so close that their branches seemed to reach out and claw at the vehicle. The air inside the car was thick with the scent of pine, mingled with the musty aroma of the old leather seats. At one particularly sharp bend, I noticed a sign partially obscured by overgrowth. The faded letters were barely legible, but they seemed to spell out dead end. I was about to turn back when a flash of something white caught my eye, something out of place amidst the darkness and the trees. It was a rickety wooden sign hanging askew, barely visible in the dim light. Curiosity got the better of me, and I slowed to read it. "Rest stop," it said. Though it was clear this was anything but a regular rest stop, there was no indication of any amenities or services, just a crude arrow pointing further into the forest. Against my better judgment, I decided to follow the arrow. The road narrowed even further, the trees seeming to close in around me like a suffocating embrace. The darkness outside was so complete that it felt almost tangible, as if the forest was alive and watching. My headlights revealed twisted branches and underbrush that seemed to writhe and shift as if alive. After what felt like an eternity, the road opened up into a small clearing. At the center stood a dilapidated cabin, its wooden exterior weathered and decaying. The roof sagged under the weight of time and neglect, and the windows were dark, their glass long shattered or missing entirely. The place had an air of abandonment, yet something about it gave me the unsettling feeling that I was not alone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I slowly approached the cabin, my headlights casting long, eerie shadows that danced across the ground. I parked the car and stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath my feet. The night was silent except for the occasional rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. I walked up to the cabin, my footsteps hesitant, my senses on high alert. As I drew closer, I noticed strange markings on the doorframe, symbols etched deeply into the wood, worn by time and weather, but still visible enough to send a shiver down my spine. I reached for the door, but before I could touch it, I heard a noise behind me, a faint, almost imperceptible rustling. I spun around, my flashlight beam slicing through the darkness, but there was nothing there, just the shadowy silhouettes of trees. My pulse quickened, and I felt a sudden urge to leave, but my curiosity pushed me forward. I needed to understand what this place was and why it felt so unnervingly wrong. With a deep breath, I opened the door, which creaked loudly as it swung on its hinges. The interior was dimly lit by the moonlight filtering through the broken windows, revealing a space that was as decrepit as the exterior. Dust hung thick in the air, and old furniture lay scattered around an overturned chair, a broken table, and a sofa that seemed to have been there for decades. In one corner, an old fireplace stood cold and empty, its hearth covered in cobwebs. As I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me with a thunderous bang, making me jump. I fumbled for my flashlight, shining it around the room to find the source of the noise, but all I saw were the shadows of the derelict cabin. I tried the door, but it was stuck fast. Panic began to set in as I realized I was trapped. I turned my attention to the fireplace, hoping to find a way to pry open the door, or at least something that could help me escape. That's when I noticed something odd, a faint, flickering light coming from behind a loose brick in the fireplace. I carefully removed the brick and discovered a small, hidden compartment. Inside was an old, leather-bound journal. The cover was cracked and worn, and as I opened it, I found pages filled with frantic, scrawled handwriting. The entries were fragmented and incoherent, describing a sense of being watched and hunted, of voices whispering in the darkness, and of people disappearing without a trace. The final entry was particularly chilling, written in a shaky hand. "They're coming for me. I can hear them. Please, someone help me." Before I could process the implications, I heard a noise outside, a soft, dragging sound followed by a low, guttural murmur. My heart raced as I strained to listen, and the unmistakable feeling of eyes watching me grew stronger. I rushed to the window, but the darkness outside was impenetrable. I could see nothing but the endless void of the forest. The dragging sound grew louder, closer. I pounded on the door, shouting for help, but the cabin remained eerily silent, as if it was holding its breath. The journal fell from my hands as I frantically searched for another way out. Just when I felt like I could no longer bear the fear, the door creaked open slowly, revealing the empty night outside. I bolted for the car, my heart pounding in my chest, and sped down the road without looking back. The sense of dread never left me, and as I emerged from the forest and back onto the main road, I glanced in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see something or someone following me. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night or what I encountered in that forsaken cabin. The memory still haunts me, and the image of those cryptic journal entries and the oppressive silence of the forest remain etched in my mind. Sometimes, when the night is particularly dark and quiet, I wonder if the forest is still watching, waiting for the next unwary traveler to take the wrong turn. Story 16. The apartment building on Elm Street had always been a quiet place, a little island of calm in the bustling city. But when the first break-in occurred, it was so out of character that it barely registered. It was only when the second and third break-ins followed, with no clear pattern, that the residents began to feel a creeping unease. For months, I had enjoyed a comfortable, predictable life in my modest apartment. I was an artist, content with my daily routine of painting and sipping coffee. The sudden intrusion into my sanctuary was disorienting. The first time it happened, I chalked it up to a fluke. Nothing was stolen, and the only evidence was a broken lock in a disheveled living room. I didn't think much of it until it happened again. By the third incident, I was on edge. The pattern was random, almost as if the intruder was testing different units to see what they could find. I started to notice small changes. A book moved on my shelf, a kitchen drawer slightly ajar. It was as if someone was rummaging through my life, but leaving everything in its place. The sensation was more unsettling than if things had been outright stolen. It was during the fourth break-in that the situation took a disturbing turn. I was out for the evening when it happened. I returned to find a message scrawled on the wall in what looked like red ink. It was simple: "Your next panic set in." I called the police, but their response was frustratingly slow and their investigations yielded nothing. The residents began to speculate. Was it an inside job? Someone who knew the building's layout intimately. We held meetings, discussed theories, but nothing seemed to fit. Some thought it was a prank. Others feared it was a more sinister plot. The unease grew as the break-ins continued, with each new incident further eroding our sense of security. One evening, as I was sitting alone in my apartment, I decided to delve deeper into the situation. I reviewed my security footage, hoping for some clue. As I watched, something peculiar caught my eye, a fleeting shadow in the hallway, just outside my door. It was too quick to identify, but it was enough to spark a new line of thinking. Could the intruder be someone who had access to the security system? I started keeping a journal of every strange occurrence, every sighting, and every feeling of discomfort. The more I wrote, the more patterns began to emerge. The break-ins seemed to follow a schedule, albeit irregular. I noticed that the intruder always struck when certain people were away, but who could be orchestrating this? My suspicion eventually fell on an unlikely source, the building's handyman. He was a quiet, unassuming man named George, who had always seemed friendly enough. He was the one who fixed locks, repaired leaks, and generally kept the building in order, but something about him didn't sit right with me. I began to observe him more closely, watching for any signs of suspicious behavior. One afternoon, I saw George in the basement, working on something near the security panel. He was usually quite private about his tasks, but this time he was fumbling with wires and muttering to himself. It was an odd sight. I managed to catch a glimpse of a small device in his hand, a device I recognized from my research as a security system bypass tool. My heart raced. I needed to confront him, but I had to be cautious. I decided to gather more evidence before making any accusations. I checked the security system logs and found that the times of the break-ins coincided with moments when George had been working on the system. It wasn't conclusive, but it was enough to make me suspicious. One evening, I confronted George in the building's basement. He was visibly startled when I mentioned my observations. His reaction was defensive, but not overtly incriminating. I pressed on, suggesting that perhaps he should have the security system inspected by a professional. George's response was a mix of irritation and nervousness, which only deepened my concerns. I took my findings to the building's management, but without concrete proof, they were reluctant to take action. Desperation led me to speak directly with the police again, presenting my observations and theories. They agreed to investigate further, focusing on George. It wasn't long before they discovered a hidden cache of stolen items in his apartment and a set of tools that matched the ones I had seen. The ultimate resolution came when George was arrested and confessed. He had been using his access to the building's security system to disable alarms and locks, targeting apartments in a seemingly random pattern to avoid suspicion. His motivation was financial. He needed money to cover debts and had thought he could get away with it by keeping the thefts subtle and spread out. The break-in stopped immediately after his arrest. The building returned to its peaceful state, but the impact of the events lingered. The revelation about George was a shock to everyone. He had been trusted, and his betrayal left a mark on the community. It was a reminder that sometimes the ultimate threat can come from the most unexpected places, and that vigilance and scrutiny are crucial in protecting what we hold dear. Story 17. When I first started exploring online communities, I was excited by the idea of connecting with people who shared my interests. I'd always been a bit of a loner, and the anonymity of the internet offered a safe space where I could express myself without fear of judgment. It wasn't long before I joined a popular forum dedicated to my favorite hobby, gaming. One day, while scrolling through threads about a new release, I came across a user named NexusX who seemed to share my enthusiasm for the game. Their posts were insightful and well-written, and their passion for the subject was evident. I decided to send them a private message, introducing myself and expressing my appreciation for their contributions to the forum. To my surprise, NexusX responded almost immediately. Our conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about game strategies, upcoming releases, and even shared personal anecdotes. It felt refreshing to find someone who understood me so well. Over the next few weeks, NexusX and I continued chatting regularly. Our conversations expanded beyond gaming as we started discussing movies, books, and our daily lives. They seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, and I found myself looking forward to our exchanges. I was cautious, though. My parents had always warned me about online strangers, and I was careful not to share too much personal information. One evening, NexusX asked if we could exchange phone numbers. They suggested it would be more convenient than relying on the forum's messaging system. I hesitated, but they assured me that it was merely to facilitate our conversations. They even offered to give me their number first to prove their sincerity. I reluctantly agreed and gave them my number. Our text conversations began to mirror the easy flow of our online chats. The months went by, and I noticed something odd. Nexus X seemed to know a bit too much about my life. They'd mentioned things I'd only shared in passing, details about my work schedule, the places I liked to visit, and even the names of some of my friends. I chalked it up to coincidence, or maybe the fact that I'd mentioned these things in our conversations without realizing it. Still, a nagging sense of discomfort lingered at the back of my mind. One day, while I was out running errands, I received a text from Nexus X saying they had accidentally met me at a local cafe. They expressed surprise at how close we were geographically and asked if they could join me next time I visited. I felt a chill run down my spine. I had never shared my exact location with them, and the idea that they had seen me without my knowledge unsettled me. I began to distance myself, slowly pulling back from our conversations. I would take longer to reply, and would often find excuses to avoid engaging in deep conversations. Nexus X noticed my change in behavior and began to question me, asking if I was upset or if I had met someone else. Their persistence made me uneasy, but I didn't want to cause a confrontation, so I continued to keep my distance. Then, one evening, I received a text that made my heart race. It was a photo of me, taken from a distance, at a park I frequented. The message accompanying the photo read, "Just thinking of you and hoping to catch you on one of your walks." I was horrified. The realization that Nexus X had been tracking my movements hit me like a ton of bricks. I knew I had to take action, but I wasn't sure where to start. I immediately blocked Nexus X on all platforms and changed my phone number. I also reported the incidents to the forum administrators, but their response was dismissive, suggesting I should have been more cautious online. Feeling frustrated and vulnerable, I reached out to the local authorities to report the stalking. The police took my case seriously and conducted an investigation, but because Nexus X had been careful not to break any laws directly, they couldn't take immediate action against them. Despite the lack of immediate results, the police offered advice on how to protect myself further. They suggested changing my routines, securing my online accounts, and being vigilant about my surroundings. I took their advice to heart and implemented as many of their recommendations as possible. Over time, the feeling of being constantly watched began to fade, and I gradually started to reclaim my sense of security. I joined support groups for people who had experienced similar situations, and talking with others who had gone through similar ordeals helped me process my feelings and regain my confidence. Looking back, I can't help but feel a mix of relief and regret. I regret not recognizing the red flags sooner and for not taking stronger precautions from the beginning. However, I'm grateful that I took steps to protect myself and eventually managed to escape the situation. I've learned to be more cautious online, but I also try not to let fear dominate my life. The experience was a harsh reminder of the dangers that can lurk behind the screens of our devices, and it reinforced the importance of remaining vigilant, even in spaces where we expect to find comfort and connection. Story 18. Living with a roommate seemed like a great idea at first. After all, it promised to make college life more affordable and hopefully a bit more social. When I first met Julia, I was struck by her calm demeanor and unassuming nature. She had a warm smile and spoke with a soothing tone, which in hindsight was a bit too smooth for comfort. But I was eager to make a good impression and secure a pleasant living arrangement, so I brushed aside any lingering doubts. At first, everything appeared perfect. Julia was always courteous, never left a mess, and seemed genuinely interested in making our shared space comfortable. She'd greet me with a friendly smile every morning and made an effort to remember the little things, like asking about my weekend plans or inquiring about my exams. It was the kind of roommate experience one could only hope for, and I found myself appreciating her company more and more as the days passed. However, as time went on, I began to notice some odd behaviors. There was a pattern to Julia's calmness that struck me as strange. She would never get upset, never seem irritated, no matter what. If I was running late with rent, she didn't bat an eye. When I accidentally spilled coffee on the couch, she simply cleaned it up without a hint of frustration. Her ability to stay unflappable in all situations was, I thought, a sign of remarkable maturity. Yet there was something unsettling about it. One evening, as I sat at my desk studying, I overheard Julia talking on the phone. It wasn't the content of the conversation that was disturbing, but rather the way she spoke. She had a voice that was almost hypnotic, too controlled, and too smooth. She was speaking to someone about keeping up appearances and maintaining the facade. The conversation ended with her saying, "I know what's expected of me, and I will deliver." This exchange left me feeling uneasy, and I couldn't shake off the feeling that there was something I wasn't being told. Over the following weeks, I started paying closer attention to Julia's interactions and habits. Her social circles seemed unusually small, and she rarely had visitors. When she did, they were always impeccably dressed and carried an air of formality that seemed out of place in our otherwise casual dorm. I began to wonder if there was something behind Julia's facade of perfection. I decided to do a little digging. My opportunity came one night when Julia left her laptop unattended while taking a phone call. My curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it, not knowing what to expect. What I found was chilling. Her laptop was filled with files detailing extensive research on psychological manipulation techniques. There were also drafts of emails that detailed strategies for maintaining control and appearances in various social settings. Julia was a master at presenting a flawless image, but it was becoming increasingly clear that this was a carefully crafted facade. As I delved deeper into her digital world, I discovered a folder labeled Emergencies. Inside were a series of documents outlining various contingency plans for different scenarios, from financial crises to personal disputes. Each plan was meticulously detailed, outlining how Julia would manage and resolve issues while keeping up her perfect, serene exterior. Realizing that Julia's calmness was not just a personal trait but a meticulously constructed strategy was disorienting. The more I learned, the more I understood that Julia was not just a person with an unusual level of self-control. She was an expert in creating and maintaining an image of perfection at all costs. It was as if her entire existence was a performance. One evening I confronted Julia about what I had discovered. She listened to me with the same calm demeanor she always exhibited. Her eyes, however, had a coldness that I hadn't noticed before. "I understand you're confused," she said, her voice as smooth and measured as ever. "But you must understand that appearances are important. It's how people perceive us that truly matters." The conversation that followed was surreal. Julia explained that she had been trained in various techniques of emotional control and image management from a young age. Her family had invested heavily in her ability to present a perfect image to the world. She spoke of this as if it were simply a professional skill, like mastering a craft. In that moment, I realized that Julia's calmness was not a sign of her inner peace, but a meticulous and deliberate act. She wasn't genuinely serene, she was performing. Living with someone who was so expertly adept at masking their true self was unsettling. It was as if the very foundation of our roommate relationship was based on an illusion. The realization left me feeling both shaken and liberated. I had to come to terms with the fact that my ideal roommate experience had been tainted by a facade. Yet it also made me appreciate the value of authenticity and the importance of knowing and accepting people for who they truly are, not just who they appear to be. I moved out shortly after that conversation, and while I never truly understood the extent of Julia's motivations, the experience was a profound lesson. It reminded me that behind every facade, no matter how perfect, there's always a deeper reality waiting to be uncovered. Story 19. When Jordan's best friend, Max, vanished without a trace, it felt like the world had shifted beneath his feet. The two had been inseparable since childhood, sharing countless adventures and dreams. Max's disappearance was sudden, and the police investigation yielded no leads, leaving Jordan to tackle the mystery on his own. Jordan's first step was to revisit Max's apartment, a modest space filled with their shared memories. The apartment was eerily untouched, every book and photograph in its place, as if Max had stepped out for a brief moment. Yet, the absence of Max's favorite books and the sudden disarray of personal items sent a shiver down Jordan's spine. He knew Max well enough to recognize that something was off. Diving deeper, Jordan began to sift through Max's social media accounts, hoping for a clue. It was here that he encountered the first unsettling detail. Max had been unusually active in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, posting cryptic messages about feeling watched and uneasy. These messages were accompanied by a series of photographs of unfamiliar places and people, each more disturbing than the last. One particular photo stood out, an image of a dark alley with a caption, "Sometimes the shadows are too close." Jordan's next move was to interview people Max had been in contact with recently. He reached out to Max's colleagues, acquaintances, and even old friends, piecing together snippets of Max's last days. Many described Max as increasingly withdrawn and anxious. A former coworker mentioned that Max had been receiving strange phone calls, though he never divulged any details. Determined to uncover more, Jordan followed a lead to Max's favorite cafe, a cozy little place with vintage decor and a warm atmosphere. The barista, a young woman named Emma, recalled Max's frequent visits. She mentioned that Max had recently grown quiet and secretive, often leaving the cafe in a hurry. Emma also mentioned a man who had been seen talking to Max on several occasions, a figure she described as unsettling. Jordan decided to track down this mysterious man whose description led him to a small, unremarkable apartment building on the edge of town. After some inquiry, he discovered that the man's name was Thomas, and he had a reputation for dubious activities. Jordan managed to arrange a meeting with Thomas under the guise of seeking information about Max. During their conversation, Thomas was evasive and defensive. He claimed to have known Max only casually, but his discomfort was palpable. Jordan noticed a small notebook on Thomas's desk, filled with sketches and notes. One sketch depicted an intricate maze with symbols that resembled those found in Max's recent photos. This discovery only deepened the mystery. Jordan's investigation led him to a small, obscure bookstore where Max had been a frequent customer. The owner, an elderly man named Mr. Harper, revealed that Max had been researching esoteric subjects, particularly those related to ancient symbols and hidden knowledge. Mr. Harper mentioned a book Max had been reading obsessively before his disappearance, a rare volume about secret societies and occult practices. Jordan managed to acquire a copy of the book, and its contents were as disturbing as they were perplexing. The book detailed various secret rituals and hidden places associated with a clandestine group known as the Veil. According to the text, members of the Veil were believed to possess knowledge of hidden realms and could manipulate reality in ways unknown to the general public. The more Jordan delved into Max's research, the clearer it became that Max had been exploring dangerous territory. The connections between the esoteric symbols, the eerie photographs, and the secretive behavior suggested that Max had stumbled upon something far beyond his understanding. It seemed that he had been drawn into a world that promised ultimate knowledge, but at a perilous cost. Jordan's investigation took him to a remote location that matched the descriptions in Max's notes. The area was desolate, shrouded in mist, and eerily silent. He found a hidden entrance to an underground chamber, its walls covered in the same symbols Max had studied. The chamber was empty, except for an old, weathered chest. Opening the chest, Jordan found a series of documents and artifacts related to the Veil. Among them was a letter from Max, written in a shaky hand. The letter revealed that Max had discovered a hidden society with the ability to alter perceptions and reality. Max had been attempting to uncover their secrets, but he had become fearful of the consequences. The final line of the letter read, "I'm not sure if I can escape their grasp. If I disappear, know that I tried to find the ultimate truth." Jordan was left with more questions than answers. The evidence suggested that Max had been entangled in something far more complex and dangerous than he had anticipated. His disappearance was no longer a simple case of a missing person, but rather a journey into the unknown, a search for truths that were meant to remain hidden. As Jordan emerged from the chamber, the weight of Max's quest and the dark implications of the Veil's secrets hung heavily over him. Max's ultimate fate remained a mystery, but Jordan knew that his friend's search for knowledge had led him to the edge of an abyss that few could comprehend. Story 20. Curiosity had always been a driving force in Jake's life. When he stumbled across a forum discussing the dark web, he was intrigued. It was a place he had heard about in whispers and shadowy tales, a realm of digital secrets and forbidden goods. Despite his better judgment, Jake decided to explore it, driven by a desire to understand what lay behind the veil of anonymity. Navigating through the encrypted sites was like stepping into an alternate universe. The web pages were littered with cryptic messages and dubious offers. He scrolled past illicit drugs, counterfeit currencies, and bizarre items, each more unsettling than the last. As he delved deeper, his eyes fell upon an ad for what was described as a mystery box, a package that promised to contain rare and unique items, each chosen to provide a thrill. The description was vague and sensational, designed to ignite curiosity. It was cheap, a tempting factor for someone who was both financially cautious and adventurous. Jake's heartbeat quickened as he made the purchase. The transaction was seamless, conducted through anonymous channels that shielded the seller's identity. The process was quick, and within days, a small, nondescript package arrived at his doorstep. It was unmarked, save for a barely noticeable emblem on the wrapping, a symbol Jake didn't recognize. He hesitated before opening it, a part of him sensing that this was a step into unknown territory. But the allure of the mystery was too powerful. He peeled away the layers of packaging, revealing a plain black box. Inside, the contents were a jumble of seemingly random items: an old, tarnished key, a faded photograph of a building he didn't recognize, and a small, peculiar device with an assortment of dials and switches. Jake's initial excitement began to wane as he examined the items. The key was old and rusted, the photograph was too blurry to provide any real clues, and the device was a mystery. His gut feeling of unease grew stronger, but he decided to investigate further. He took the device apart, only to find a hidden compartment inside, containing a flash drive. His curiosity overpowered his apprehension. Jake plugged the flash drive into his computer, unaware that he was unlocking a Pandora's box. The drive contained encrypted files, which he attempted to open using various methods. It wasn't long before his computer was bombarded with a series of alerts and warnings. The screen flashed with disturbing images, and a message appeared: "You shouldn't have looked." Panic set in. Jake realized he had inadvertently accessed something much more dangerous than he could have imagined. The images and messages were increasingly sinister, and he felt a chilling realization that he had exposed himself to something beyond his control. He disconnected the flash drive and attempted to shut down his computer, but it was too late. His system was already compromised. The immediate danger escalated when he noticed unfamiliar activity on his bank accounts and social media profiles. It became clear that his personal information had been accessed. Fear gripped him as he realized that the mystery box was not just a harmless curiosity, but a catalyst for a much more dire situation. Jake quickly sought help from a cybersecurity expert, who informed him that his computer had been infected with malware designed to extract personal data. The expert advised him to contact the authorities, but Jake was hesitant. He was deeply embarrassed and fearful of the legal consequences of his dark web escapade. Despite his reluctance, Jake followed the expert's advice and reported the incident. The authorities began an investigation, but Jake was left to deal with the fallout. He had to change all his passwords, secure his financial accounts, and take steps to protect his identity. The entire experience left him shaken and wary of his own curiosity. As he reflected on the events, Jake realized the ultimate lesson: some mysteries are better left unexplored. The dark web, with its promises of hidden wonders and excitement, had led him down a path fraught with danger and consequences. What he had initially perceived as a harmless adventure had exposed him to real threats and fear. The aftermath was a sobering reminder of the risks associated with curiosity in the dark corners of the internet. Jake had learned the hard way that some doors, once opened, reveal more than just answers. They unveil dangers that can have lasting repercussions. Story 21. The town of Crestwood was small, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, and secrets were hard to keep. When Julia Adams went missing, the entire community was thrown into disarray. Julia was a vibrant 25-year-old with a bright smile and a reputation for kindness. Her disappearance felt like a cruel twist of fate, casting a shadow over the usually serene town. I had known Julia for years. We had been childhood friends, and though we had drifted apart over time, hearing about her disappearance struck a chord deep within me. When the police first announced the case, I felt compelled to help in any way I could. It was clear that the entire town was rallying to find her, and I wanted to be a part of that effort. The search began with a flurry of activity. Volunteers combed through the woods, distributed flyers, and questioned anyone who might have seen Julia recently. I joined the search parties, hoping to find even the smallest clue that might lead us to her. But as days turned into weeks, the initial hopefulness gave way to a more somber atmosphere. The media's coverage became increasingly desperate, and the town's mood shifted from hopeful to anxious. During the search, I noticed something strange. There were moments when I would catch glimpses of a man lurking at the edge of the search area. He was always at a distance, blending into the background, but there was something about his demeanor that unsettled me. His presence was subtle but persistent, and it made me uneasy. One evening, while reviewing some of the footage from the town's security cameras that the police had collected, I saw the man again. He was seen walking along a secluded path that led deep into the woods, a path that had been largely overlooked in the initial search efforts. The footage was grainy and unclear, but the man's face was recognizable. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that I knew him. His name was Evan Cole, a former classmate of mine from high school. We hadn't spoken in years, but I remembered him clearly. Evan had always been a bit of an enigma, quiet, reserved, and somewhat brooding. Back then, he had a reputation for being a loner, and though I had never had a personal issue with him, I always sensed an undercurrent of unpredictability about him. I contacted the police immediately, relaying my concerns and sharing what I had seen. They took my report seriously and began to investigate Evan's connection to the case. They discovered that he had recently moved back to town after a lengthy absence, and his return coincided with Julia's disappearance. The investigation into Evan quickly revealed troubling information. He had been in trouble with the law before, but the offenses were relatively minor vandalism, petty theft. However, it seemed that his recent return to Crestwood had involved more sinister activities. The police found evidence suggesting that he had been obsessively following Julia, a detail that made the situation all the more disturbing. One night, the police decided to confront Evan. They obtained a search warrant for his property, and after hours of questioning, found incriminating evidence in his home, personal items belonging to Julia, and a collection of disturbing notes detailing his thoughts and feelings about her. The discovery painted a chilling picture of Evan's obsession. As the police worked to piece together the evidence, I found myself in a state of disbelief. The realization that someone I knew, or at least someone I had been acquainted with, could be capable of such horror was both shocking and surreal. Evan's involvement in Julia's disappearance was confirmed, and he was taken into custody. The community was left grappling with the aftermath. Julia was still missing, and the search continued with renewed urgency. Despite the evidence against Evan, he remained tight-lipped about her whereabouts. The darkness of the case seemed to grow deeper with every passing day. Eventually, Julia's body was discovered in a remote area of the woods, not far from where Evan had been seen on the security footage. The discovery brought a tragic sense of closure to the case, but it also left the town in mourning. The horror of what had happened was a heavy weight that settled over Crestwood, changing it forever. In the wake of Julia's death and Evan's arrest, I found it difficult to reconcile the person I had known with the one who had committed such unspeakable acts. The case left a deep scar on me and the entire community. It was a stark reminder of how the dark undercurrents of human nature can emerge in the most unexpected ways. As I tried to process everything, I realized that the shadows of the past can often conceal the darkest truths. The experience left me with a profound understanding of the fragility of trust and the haunting possibility that the people we think we know can harbor the most sinister intentions. Story 22. When I moved to the small town of Greenwood, I was thrilled by the prospect of a fresh start. The rent was affordable, the neighborhood seemed quaint, and the locals were friendly. It was exactly the kind of peaceful retreat I'd been seeking after years of living in bustling cities. Little did I know, my excitement was about to be overshadowed by a grim reality. The first few weeks in Greenwood were idyllic. I spent my days exploring the picturesque streets, and evenings were filled with pleasant conversations with my new neighbors. The town had an old-world charm, with its vintage shops and historic homes. It wasn't until I began to notice a few peculiarities that I started to feel uneasy. The local residents seemed unusually tired, and were often plagued by persistent coughs and skin rashes. I chalked it up to seasonal allergies or perhaps a flu strain that was going around. As time went on, my curiosity grew. I started digging into the history of the town, hoping to understand why it was so cheap to live there. My inquiries led me to a local library where I stumbled upon old town records and newspapers. I noticed several articles mentioning an old waste dump situated just on the outskirts of town. The articles were brief but hinted at environmental issues related to the site. My heart sank as I connected the dots. The once seemingly charming town had a hidden dark side. One evening, I decided to investigate the area near the dump. I drove to the edge of town, where overgrown vegetation concealed a fenced-off plot of land. The fence was old and rusted, and the no trespassing sign was barely legible. I carefully climbed over the fence, the air thick with an acrid smell that made my throat itch. I could see remnants of old barrels and machinery scattered about. The ground was stained with odd-colored patches, and the once green grass was now a sickly yellow. As I walked through the site, I noticed several other signs of contamination: discolored puddles, strange residue, and a general feeling of decay that seemed to permeate the air. I knew that I needed to find out more about the nature of the toxic waste that had been dumped here, and how it might be affecting the residents of Greenwood. The next day, I went to town hall to request more information about the waste site. The clerk, an older woman with a weary expression, reluctantly handed over a file after much hesitation. The documents revealed that the town had been built over an old industrial waste dump from the 1950s. The waste contained various hazardous chemicals, and over time it had leached into the groundwater and soil. The town had supposedly undergone remediation efforts in the past, but it seemed that they were insufficient or poorly managed. The records indicated that there had been numerous complaints from residents about health issues, but the town officials had downplayed the severity of the severity. Then, it was clear that the affordable housing was directly linked to the hidden costs of environmental contamination. Armed with this knowledge, I began to notice more signs of the environmental impact. Many of my neighbors had unexplained health issues, frequent headaches, rashes, and persistent illnesses. Children played in the park, oblivious to the potential dangers beneath their feet. Conversations with locals revealed a general sense of resignation and acceptance, as if the residents had grown used to living with these problems and had little hope of change. Determined to make a difference, I reached out to environmental advocacy groups and local media. The response was cautious but supportive. A journalist from a regional newspaper agreed to cover the story, and soon enough, the issue gained wider attention. Public pressure mounted, and the town council was forced to address the situation more openly. In the weeks that followed, the town initiated more comprehensive cleanup efforts, and there were talks about relocating affected families and providing medical assistance. The process was slow and fraught with bureaucratic hurdles, but it was a start. Residents were cautiously hopeful that improvements would be made, and there was a renewed sense of vigilance about environmental policies and safety. The experience left me with a profound sense of unease, but also a renewed commitment to advocacy. The quaint town of Greenwood, with its charming facade, had hidden a toxic truth beneath its surface. It served as a stark reminder that sometimes the price of affordability comes with hidden costs that are far more than monetary. As I moved forward, I carried with me the lesson that awareness and action are crucial in confronting and addressing the dangers that lurk in the shadows of seemingly perfect places. Story 23. The day I moved into my new home was a whirlwind of excitement and exhaustion. The boxes were still stacked haphazardly in the living room, and the scent of fresh paint lingered in the air. I was eager to settle into my new space and start this new chapter in my life. The house, an old Victorian with charming details and a sense of history, had captivated me from the moment I saw it. Its quirks and age only added to its allure. It was late in the afternoon when I finally finished arranging the basics and decided to take a break. I stepped outside to stretch my legs and breathe in the crisp, autumn air. The neighborhood was quiet, with the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant chatter of children playing. I was beginning to feel a sense of belonging. As I strolled down the street, I noticed a small group of neighbors gathered near a house a few doors down. They were speaking in hushed tones, their faces etched with concern and curiosity. I approached cautiously, not wanting to intrude but feeling a pang of curiosity. I struck up a conversation with a woman who seemed to be the most approachable of the group. "I'm new to the neighborhood," I said, trying to sound casual. "Is everything okay?" Her face fell, and she looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and apprehension. "Oh dear, I didn't realize you were new. I suppose you haven't heard yet. There's been a terrible tragedy." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I asked for more details, and she hesitated before continuing. "The house just down the street," she pointed to the residence that was barely visible from where we stood, "was the scene of a horrific crime. A young woman was murdered there just last night." The news hit me like a cold wave. I tried to process the gravity of what I was hearing. A murder? But how? Why, I stammered, feeling both shocked and disoriented. The woman, whose name was Lisa, explained that the previous occupants of the house had been a young couple. They had been friendly and well-liked in the neighborhood. According to the news, the woman's name was Emily, and she had been found dead in her home. The police were still investigating, but there were no leads on the perpetrator at that time. Lisa's voice trembled as she described the aftermath. Emily's death had sent shockwaves through the community. The house had been cordoned off by the police, and the once lively home was now a crime scene. The sight of police cars and flashing lights had disrupted the quiet suburban routine, leaving everyone on edge. I felt a wave of dread wash over me. The idea that such a violent crime had occurred so close to my new home was unsettling. My thoughts raced as I struggled to imagine what might have transpired within those walls. I thanked Lisa for the information and returned to my house, my mind a whirlwind of anxiety and fear. That evening, as darkness enveloped the neighborhood, I found myself unable to shake the sense of foreboding. The house where the murder had occurred seemed to loom larger in my imagination, its silhouette casting long shadows across the street. I tried to distract myself by unpacking more boxes, but the effort felt hollow against the backdrop of the grim news. The next day, the story continued to dominate the local news. I read articles online and watched the coverage, piecing together what little information was available. The police were tight-lipped about details, but rumors and speculation swirled through the community. People whispered about potential suspects and motives, though nothing concrete emerged. The sense of unease grew with each passing day. The once charming neighborhood now felt tainted by the shadow of violence. I began to feel a disconnect between the idyllic image I had of my new home and the reality of the situation. The house that had seemed so inviting now felt like a haunted relic of a tragic event. Despite the growing tension, I decided to reach out to the neighbors to try and forge connections and understand the community better. Many were sympathetic but were still grappling with the shock of the murder. They were hesitant to discuss the details, and conversations often turned somber quickly. I appreciated their attempts to be friendly but couldn't help feeling like an outsider intruding on their shared grief. Weeks turned into months, and while the investigation continued, the initial intensity of the media coverage waned. The house where the murder occurred remained empty, a constant reminder of the tragedy. The neighborhood slowly began to find its rhythm again, but the impact of the event lingered like a dark cloud. Living in the shadow of such a traumatic event had a profound effect on me. I struggled with sleepless nights and a persistent sense of unease. The house itself, despite its beauty, became a symbol of fear rather than comfort. I found myself checking locks and windows obsessively and jumping at every little noise. My excitement about the new home had been overshadowed by the dark history it now held. Eventually, the house was sold to a new owner, and life in the neighborhood began to return to a semblance of normalcy. Yet, the memory of that chilling aftermath and the violence that once occurred within those walls stayed with me. It served as a stark reminder of how quickly a place of comfort could become a site of deep-seated fear, forever altering the way one perceives home and safety. Story 24. After the breakup, everything seemed to settle into a quiet routine. I had hoped for peace, but instead I found myself facing an unsettling obsession from my ex. It began with a seemingly innocent phone call, a request for closure. I agreed, wanting to make things clear and move on. But soon the calls became frequent and increasingly desperate, each message laced with accusations and pleas for reconciliation. I tried to ignore it, but their persistence was relentless. They would show up at my favorite coffee shop, pretending to be a casual customer but always hovering near my table. It was unnerving. The encounters escalated from chance sightings to deliberate confrontations. One evening, as I was leaving work, I noticed their car parked outside my apartment. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. One day, as I walked to my car after grocery shopping, I saw them standing by the entrance. I froze, unsure of what to do. They approached me with a forced smile, trying to engage me in conversation. I quickly got into my car and drove away, feeling a wave of relief and fear. That night, my phone buzzed with a flood of texts and missed calls. They were angry and desperate, demanding to know why I was avoiding them. The situation took a darker turn when I started receiving unwanted gifts. First, it was a bouquet of flowers, left at my doorstep. Then came a box of my favorite chocolates, accompanied by a note expressing their undying love. I felt a mix of fear and frustration. I didn't know how far they were willing to go. I decided to take action and changed my phone number, hoping it would be a clear signal that I needed space. But the harassment continued. They found new ways to contact me, leaving messages on social media or through mutual friends. Their behavior became increasingly erratic, and I began to fear for my safety. One night, after a particularly disturbing message, I decided to go to the police. I reported the situation, showing them the evidence of the unwanted contact and the gifts. They took my case seriously, advising me to document everything and to stay vigilant. Their advice provided some comfort, but the anxiety remained. Despite the police involvement, my ex's obsession didn't wane. I started noticing strange things around my apartment, a misplaced item here, a door left slightly ajar there. It felt like they were trying to invade my personal space, and it was terrifying. One evening, as I was coming home from work, I saw my ex waiting outside my building. They were agitated, pacing back and forth. I quickly called the police, but before they arrived, my ex noticed me and approached with a frantic look in their eyes. The encounter was tense, and I felt a surge of fear as they demanded to talk to me one last time. The police arrived just in time, and after a brief confrontation, my ex was escorted away. Despite the intervention, the feeling of being watched lingered. I took additional security measures, installing cameras around my apartment and changing the locks. It was exhausting to live in such constant fear, but I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. Over time, the frequency of their attempts to contact me diminished. It was as if they had finally accepted that I was not coming back and that their actions were futile. Yet the psychological impact of their obsession remained. I had to work through my fears and anxieties, seeking therapy to help me regain a sense of security and control over my life. In the end, the ordeal taught me a lot about personal boundaries and the importance of taking threats seriously. My ex's obsession had turned my world upside down, but with time, support from friends, and professional help, I began to rebuild my sense of safety and peace. Story 25. I'd always been fascinated by my family's history, drawn to the stories and secrets that seemed to lie buried in the past. It started as a hobby, searching through old records, collecting photographs, and piecing together the fragmented tales of my ancestors. The more I delved into my family's genealogy, the more I felt connected to those who came before me. Little did I know that this innocent curiosity would unravel a mystery that would shake my understanding of my own heritage. It all began one rainy afternoon as I was combing through old newspaper archives online. I was looking for articles about my great-grandfather, a figure shrouded in both admiration and whispers of controversy. I came across a series of articles from the 1920s about a crime that immediately caught my attention. The headlines were sensational: local man found dead under suspicious circumstances, and family scandal, the mysterious dapper Dilly Weissor. Charles Winslow was my great-grandfather. The articles detailed his sudden and untimely death, described as a tragic accident but surrounded by rumors of foul play. According to the reports, Charles had been found dead in his study, a single gunshot wound to the head, with no signs of forced entry or struggle. The case was quickly closed as a suicide, but whispers of a darker story persisted in the community. Intrigued, I began digging deeper, accessing court records and speaking with distant relatives who might remember something about that time. The more I uncovered, the more inconsistencies emerged. The official story was that Charles had been deeply depressed, but those who knew him described him as upbeat and optimistic. There were rumors that he had been involved in a bitter dispute over his estate with his business partner, Harold Davis, who had been seen arguing with Charles shortly before his death. The records also revealed that Harold had been questioned but never charged, and his subsequent silence only fueled speculation. I reached out to Harold's descendants, hoping to get their perspective, but they were evasive and reluctant to discuss the past. Each conversation only added layers to the complexity of the story. One evening, while reviewing old letters and family diaries, I found an envelope marked with my great-grandmother's initials. Inside was a collection of letters, many of which were written by Charles himself. They were filled with mundane observations and personal reflections, but one letter stood out. It was addressed to an unknown recipient and was never sent. In it, Charles mentioned receiving threatening notes and feeling increasingly paranoid about his safety. The more I investigated, the clearer it became that there was more to this story than met the eye. I spoke to local historians and former police officers who had been involved in the case, but most had long since retired and had little to add. It seemed that the investigation had been hastily concluded, possibly due to the influence of wealthy and powerful people who had a stake in keeping the case quiet. As I pieced together the fragments, I discovered a disturbing pattern. Harold Davis was not only Charles's business partner, but also had significant financial interests in Charles's estate. Several legal documents revealed that Harold had been poised to gain control of a substantial portion of Charles's wealth in the event of his death. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. During a conversation with a distant cousin who was a local historian, I was told about a diary kept by my great-grandmother. This diary had been stored away in an old trunk in the attic of a relative's house. My cousin managed to locate it and agreed to share it with me. The diary offered a harrowing perspective on the events leading up to Charles's death. It detailed the tension and fear my great-grandmother felt as she watched her husband become increasingly isolated and paranoid. She had written about her own fears that Harold Davis might be involved in something nefarious. One entry stood out. I overheard Harold speaking with someone about a solution to our financial troubles. I fear for Charles's life. Armed with this new evidence, I decided to revisit the case files and re-examine the available evidence with fresh eyes. The more I looked, the more apparent it became that Charles's death had been a carefully orchestrated crime. The inconsistencies in the investigation and the lack of follow-up on critical leads pointed to a cover-up. It was clear that Harold had played a significant role, but the exact nature of his involvement remained elusive. In the end, the crime remained officially unsolved, but my research had uncovered a narrative of deception and betrayal that had been hidden for decades. The revelation altered my perception of my family's legacy, casting a shadow over the stories of valor and virtue that I had once cherished. It also left me with a profound sense of unease, knowing that the truth about Charles's death was buried beneath layers of secrecy and lies. The case had become more than just a historical curiosity. It was a reminder of the complex and often dark nature of human motives and relationships. The mystery of my great-grandfather's death was a stark reminder that history is not always what it seems, and that sometimes the past holds secrets that are best left undisturbed. Story 26. I was always an adventurous soul, but nothing could have prepared me for the night I stumbled into the underground fight club. It started innocently enough. I had been out with friends, enjoying a night of bar hopping, when we ended up in a part of town I didn't recognize. The streets grew narrower, and the buildings older. We passed a nondescript door tucked between two warehouses, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something intriguing behind it. My friends were ready to call it a night, but I was curious. I convinced them to let me check it out, promising I'd be quick. As I approached the door, a sense of excitement mingled with unease. I hesitated before knocking. When the door creaked open, I found myself face to face with a burly doorman. He eyed me suspiciously, but eventually let me in after I offered a $100 bill, claiming I was there to watch a private fight. Inside, the space was dimly lit, with a makeshift ring set up in the center of a large, dingy room. The walls were adorned with faded posters of past fights, and the air was thick with the smell of sweat and desperation. The crowd was a mix of rough-looking characters and well-dressed individuals, all fixated on the fighters in the ring. I slipped into a corner, blending in with the crowd. The fights were brutal, a display of raw aggression and skill. The participants fought with an intensity that left me breathless. The stakes were high, and it was clear that this wasn't just about money. There was a primal, almost existential energy in the air. As the night went on, I noticed a pattern. The fights were not only violent, but seemed to be about survival. The winners walked away with large sums of cash, but the losers, well, they were carried out of the ring, often injured or worse. It was a spectacle I wasn't sure I should be witnessing, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. I stayed for several rounds, my curiosity growing. During a break between fights, I wandered to the back of the room where I found a narrow hallway. Drawn by a sense of intrigue, I followed it to a door marked no entry. Ignoring the warning, I pushed it open and stepped into a dimly lit office. The room was cluttered with stacks of money, betting slips, and files detailing fighter statistics. As I sifted through the papers, I realized that this wasn't just an underground fight club, it was an organized operation with extensive records. The seriousness of it all sank in. I had stumbled upon something much darker than I had anticipated. Suddenly, the door behind me swung open, and I spun around to find a man in a sharp suit standing there. His demeanor was cold, and his eyes were calculating. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice a low growl. I tried to back away, but he stepped closer, his gaze never wavering. "How did you get in?" he asked, though it was more of a statement than a question. I stammered an excuse, but he wasn't interested in hearing it. His presence was intimidating, and the realization of my precarious situation hit me hard. Just then, the sound of shouting from the main room made him pause. He glanced toward the noise, then back at me with a look of frustration. "You need to leave now," he said, his tone brooking no argument. He escorted me back to the main room, his grip firm but not rough. I stumbled out of the building, my heart racing. The night air felt like a cold splash of reality. I had seen things that went far beyond a simple underground fight club. There were lives at stake, and the operation was more sinister than I had imagined. The next morning, I tried to put the events of the previous night behind me, but the experience haunted me. I couldn't shake the images of the fighters, the blood, and the sheer desperation. I knew I had witnessed something deeply troubling, but I was unsure how to deal with it. Weeks later, a news report confirmed my worst fears. Authorities had uncovered a major illegal fight ring, complete with evidence of extortion, illegal betting, and even human trafficking. It was a relief to know that the operation was being dismantled, but the fact that I had been so close to it all made my skin crawl. Reflecting on that night, I realized how close I had come to becoming a part of something far darker than I had anticipated. The thrill of curiosity had led me into a dangerous world where the line between spectator and participant was perilously thin. The experience left a lasting impact, a reminder of how easily one can stumble into the shadows and how critical it is to heed the warning signs before it's too late. Story 27. When I first met Dr. Lydia Harper, she struck me as a model of professionalism and compassion. The soft-spoken demeanor, the reassuring smile, and the well-organized office all contributed to an air of confidence and trustworthiness. My previous doctor had retired, and I needed a new primary care physician. Dr. Harper came highly recommended, and after a brief search, I decided to schedule my routine checkup with her. The initial visit was unremarkable. She asked the usual questions about my health history, took my vitals, and conducted a physical examination. Everything seemed normal. She was attentive, asked follow-up questions, and explained each procedure and test with a calm assurance that made me feel at ease. When the appointment concluded, she assured me that my health appeared to be in good shape and scheduled a follow-up for a few months later. As time went on, I grew more accustomed to her methods. Each visit followed a similar pattern: thorough examinations, detailed discussions about my health, and what felt like a genuine interest in my well-being. It wasn't until the third visit that I noticed something peculiar. Dr. Harper began to suggest more and more tests, each more invasive than the last. At first, I didn't think much of it. She had explained that these tests were precautionary, given my family history of certain conditions. But the frequency of these tests started to raise concerns. The appointments became longer, and Dr. Harper seemed increasingly focused on my medical issues, often expressing grave concern over minor abnormalities. I began to feel overwhelmed by the sheer volume of procedures and tests she was recommending. Friends and family, noticing my growing anxiety, urged me to get a second opinion, but I hesitated. Dr. Harper's demeanor was so convincingly earnest that I couldn't shake the feeling that I was simply being overly cautious. It wasn't until I experienced a sudden and unexplained spike in medical bills that I began to question the legitimacy of the treatments I was receiving. The bills were far higher than I had anticipated, and many of the charges were for tests and procedures I hadn't fully understood or remembered consenting to. Out of frustration and concern, I decided to consult another doctor for a second opinion. Dr. Jameson, the new physician, was a stark contrast to Dr. Harper. His approach was straightforward and less emotionally driven. After reviewing my medical records and conducting a brief examination, he was visibly troubled. He explained that many of the tests Dr. Harper had ordered were unnecessary for my condition, and that some of the procedures had been misrepresented as essential when they were not. Confused and alarmed, I pressed him for details. Dr. Jameson revealed that Dr. Harper's clinic had been under investigation for a pattern of unethical practices. It appeared that she had been exploiting patients by ordering excessive and often fraudulent tests to bill insurance companies for unnecessary procedures. The severity of her actions became even clearer when Dr. Jameson explained that some of these tests had put patients at risk without any genuine benefit. The realization was both horrifying and surreal. The trust I had placed in Dr. Harper was shattered. It felt like a betrayal not only of my personal health but also of the very institution that was supposed to protect it. I was faced with the grim task of untangling the web of deceit she had woven, including dealing with the financial fallout of her exploitation. Dr. Jameson assisted me in contacting my insurance company to dispute the dubious charges. With their help, I was able to have many of the erroneous bills corrected. Meanwhile, a formal investigation into Dr. Harper's practice was launched, leading to her suspension and a thorough review of her patient records. The investigation uncovered a disturbing pattern of abuse and led to legal actions against her. For me, the aftermath was emotionally and financially draining. It took months to recover from the stress and confusion wrought by Dr. Harper's manipulations. The betrayal left me wary of medical professionals, even though most in the field are honest and dedicated. Rebuilding trust in the healthcare system became an uphill battle, and I learned to approach medical care with heightened skepticism and diligence. Eventually, I found a new doctor who restored my faith in the profession. The experience with Dr. Harper was a harsh lesson in vigilance and the importance of questioning even seemingly benign recommendations. Though the ordeal left scars, it also instilled a deeper appreciation for the ethical standards and the need for transparency in healthcare. Story 28. After months of enduring a dull and monotonous job, I was enticed by a charismatic stranger who promised me a surefire way to make substantial returns on my savings. This stranger, a suave individual named Victor, appeared to be a financial genius, spinning tales of high-yield investments that seemed too good to be true. His confidence and the polished veneer of his presentations were mesmerizing, almost hypnotic. Victor's charm was infectious, and he made the complex world of investing seem simple and accessible. He spoke in a calm, reassuring manner, and his stories of past successes were delivered with such conviction that doubt never had a chance to take root. I had been searching for a break from the rut of my 9-to-5 job, and Victor's proposition was a beacon of hope. He showed me slick brochures and elaborate financial projections that painted a picture of immense wealth. He emphasized that this was a limited-time opportunity, which only added to the sense of urgency. My initial skepticism was quickly overshadowed by the allure of easy money and the fear of missing out on a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Victor's pitch involved investing in a series of high-risk ventures, which he assured me were backed by extensive research and expert analysis. He talked about the potential returns with such enthusiasm that I couldn't help but be swept away by the prospect of a luxurious future. To solidify his credibility, Victor introduced me to a network of individuals who appeared to be successful investors themselves, further reinforcing his credibility. With each passing meeting, my initial reservations eroded. Victor's ability to answer my questions with ease and his willingness to share detailed reports only deepened my trust in him. He encouraged me to invest a significant portion of my savings, assuring me that this was a prudent decision. Despite the mounting pressure, I found it hard to resist the temptation of financial freedom and the promise of a life unburdened by financial constraints. The investment began smoothly, with regular updates and positive reports that seemed to validate Victor's claims. For a while, everything appeared to be going according to plan. I began to envision a brighter future, one filled with travel, new experiences, and a more comfortable lifestyle. Victor maintained his facade of professionalism and continued to offer reassurances, keeping me on the hook with frequent communications and updates that painted an optimistic picture. However, as time passed, cracks in the facade started to appear. The updates became less frequent, and when they did come, they were filled with vague jargon and excuses. Victor's once smooth demeanor began to show signs of strain, and the glossy veneer of his operation began to peel away. My attempts to contact him directly became increasingly difficult, with messages going unanswered and phone calls falling into voicemail. The situation took a dark turn when I received a series of threatening phone calls from individuals claiming to be involved in the investment scheme. They were demanding more money and using aggressive tactics to pressure me into complying. The realization hit me like a freight train. I had been drawn into a web of deceit orchestrated by a skilled con artist. The charming facade that had initially lured me in was nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion designed to manipulate and exploit. As the true nature of the scam became apparent, I found myself entangled in a dangerous and precarious situation. The more I tried to extricate myself, the more threats and intimidation I faced. The individuals involved in the scheme were ruthless, and their tactics were designed to keep me in line and extract as much money as possible before abandoning me to my fate. Desperation set in as I realized the gravity of my situation. I sought help from law enforcement, but the trail was cold and the perpetrators had covered their tracks well. The financial and emotional toll of the experience was immense. The sense of betrayal and loss was compounded by the fear of further repercussions from those involved in the scheme. In the end, I was left with a shattered sense of trust and a significant financial setback. The allure of quick and easy money had led me into a nightmare that took considerable time and effort to resolve. The experience served as a harsh lesson in the importance of due diligence and skepticism, especially when dealing with individuals who present themselves as too good to be true. Victor vanished as quickly as he had appeared, leaving behind a trail of broken dreams and financial ruin. The aftermath of the scam left me grappling with the harsh reality of the situation and the lingering effects of having been deceived by a master manipulator. The ultimate lesson was clear in the world of investments and opportunities. Caution and critical thinking are paramount, and the seductive allure of easy wealth can often mask the most dangerous of schemes. Story 29. When I first took the job at the warehouse, I was desperate for any form of employment. The place was located on the outskirts of town, far from the bustling streets I was used to. From the outside, the warehouse looked like any other large industrial and weathered by years of use. However, as soon as I walked through the doors, a sense of unease settled over me. The air was thick and musty, and the fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting erratic shadows on the concrete floor. My first day was uneventful, save for the strange, almost oppressive silence that pervaded the warehouse. The few employees I met were standoffish, offering little in the way of conversation or comfort. Their eyes seemed to dart around nervously, avoiding direct contact. I brushed it off as typical workplace shyness and focused on learning the ropes. The task assigned to me was simple sorting and cataloging various boxes of items that had been delivered. Yet the more I delved into the contents of these boxes, the more I felt a creeping sense of dread. Many of the items were peculiar old medical equipment, worn-out clothing, and strange, dusty artifacts that seemed out of place in a warehouse. As the days went by, I started to notice a pattern. The boxes were not filled with ordinary goods, but with items that seemed to have a story of their own, each one laden with a peculiar sense of history, and often something darker. One evening, while sorting through a particularly large box marked confidential, I found something that sent chills down my spine. Among the dust-covered items was a series of photographs, all depicting the same group of people in various settings. Their faces were eerily familiar, but it was the setting that disturbed me. The images were taken within the very warehouse where I worked. The photos showed the same dilapidated corners and narrow aisles I walked through daily, but the people in them appeared to be in some sort of trance or daze, their expressions vacant and unsettling. I decided to investigate further. Late at night, when the warehouse was empty and silent, I began to explore the building's nooks and crannies. The deeper I went, the more I felt like I was uncovering layers of a dark secret. I found hidden rooms behind false walls, rooms that seemed to have been abandoned in a hurry. Old machinery lay scattered, covered in grime, and dusty furniture was strewn about as if left in a moment of panic. One room in particular caught my attention. It was a small office, cluttered with files and old papers. As I sifted through the documents, I discovered records detailing the warehouse's past operations. The papers revealed a series of unsettling practices, unauthorized experiments, missing persons reports, and cryptic notes about subjects and tests. The more I read, the clearer it became that the warehouse had once been a covert research facility, conducting dubious experiments on people who had mysteriously vanished. The ultimate revelation came when I stumbled upon a diary tucked away in a drawer. The diary belonged to a former employee, and its entries detailed the gradual descent into madness that had overtaken the staff. The final entries were particularly disturbing. They described eerie phenomena, including disembodied voices and the inexplicable feeling of being watched. The writer had become increasingly paranoid, convinced that the warehouse itself was alive and malevolent. As I pieced together the diary's fragmented accounts, I realized that the warehouse's strange atmosphere was no accident. It was as if the building was designed to disorient and unsettle its occupants. I began to see the warehouse for what it truly was, a labyrinthine structure designed to hide its sinister operations and to exert a psychological grip on those who entered. The final straw came when I saw a new shipment being delivered late one night, large crates marked with the same confidential label that I had seen before. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. I followed the delivery men as they unloaded the crates and saw them being taken into a restricted area of the warehouse, a place I had never been allowed to enter. Unable to contain my fear and curiosity, I tried to sneak into the restricted area. As I approached the entrance, I heard muffled voices and the sound of something being dragged. My heart pounded in my chest as I peered through a small window and saw something I will never forget. A dark ritual was taking place, with figures in hooded robes surrounding a large, ominous object. The scene was so surreal and horrifying that I couldn't process what I was seeing. In a panic, I fled the warehouse, leaving behind my job and my sense of normalcy. I never returned, and I've kept the details of what I uncovered a secret, knowing that few would believe me. The warehouse, with its dark history and disturbing practices, remains a chilling reminder of the hidden horrors that can exist behind seemingly ordinary facades. The ultimate truth is that some places are better left unexplored, their secrets buried, and their shadows left undisturbed. Story 30. It was a typical Tuesday at the office for Emma, a mid-level manager at a bustling marketing firm. The company was in the midst of a major project, and the usual hum of activity filled the space. Emma was busy reviewing campaign analytics and planning strategy meetings when the unexpected happened. The morning had been uneventful, the kind that lulled you into a false sense of security. Emma was just about to head to the break room for a cup of coffee when a sudden, loud bang echoed through the office. Her heart raced as the noise startled her and her colleagues. Moments later, the main entrance to their floor burst open, and a group of masked men armed with guns stormed in. Panic spread like wildfire through the office. Employees screamed and ducked under desks, scrambling for cover. Emma's instincts kicked in as she dove beneath her desk, her mind racing with fear and confusion. The intruders, dressed in dark clothing and wearing ski masks, moved with alarming efficiency. They barked orders, demanding everyone to stay silent and not make any sudden moves. Emma's pulse pounded in her ears as she tried to make sense of the situation. Her heart sank as she saw one of the intruders grab her friend and colleague, Daniel, pulling him out from under his desk. Daniel, a senior executive known for his calm demeanor, was visibly shaken. The intruders dragged him to the center of the office, their guns trained on him. Emma's mind raced as she wondered why they had targeted Daniel. She glanced around and saw the same fear reflected in the eyes of her colleagues. The intruders began to issue demands, their voices cold and commanding. They wanted access to the company's financial records and were threatening to harm their hostages if their demands were not met. As the minutes ticked by, Emma realized that the situation was more than a simple robbery. The intruders seemed to know precisely where to go and what to demand, suggesting they had inside information. The office, usually a place of collaboration and camaraderie, had turned into a tense environment of fear and uncertainty. Emma noticed that one of the intruders was behaving differently from the others. While the others were focused on maintaining control, this one appeared to be observing the room, his gaze lingering on various employees. His movements were calculated, and his expression was unreadable. Emma's anxiety grew as she realized this intruder was not only directing the situation but seemed to taking a personal interest in her and her colleagues. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Emma's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Why was Daniel being targeted? What did they want with the financial records? And who was this person who seemed to be watching them so closely? The tension was palpable, and every creak of the office seemed magnified in the silence that followed the intruder's demands. Just when Emma thought the situation could not get any worse, she noticed something unsettling. One of the intruders, the one who had been watching, appeared to exchange a subtle nod with Daniel. It was a fleeting moment, but it was enough to make Emma's heart sink further. Was Daniel involved in this somehow? Emma's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the office door opening again. This time, it wasn't another intruder but the police. The SWAT team, following a tip-off about a possible hostage situation, had arrived. The tension escalated as the police began negotiating with the intruders through a loudspeaker. As the negotiations continued, Emma overheard snippets of conversation that painted a darker picture. The intruders were not just demanding money, they were seeking something much more specific and personal. They wanted sensitive information that could expose secrets about several employees, including Daniel. The revelation hit Emma hard. Daniel, whom she had always seen as a reliable colleague, was at the center of this crisis. The intruders were clearly after something that went beyond mere financial gain. Emma's fear intensified as she realized that the entire office might be caught in a web of deceit and betrayal. The situation reached a critical point when the intruders grew increasingly agitated. Their demands were not being met quickly enough, and their threats became more severe. Emma could see the desperation in their eyes, and the danger was becoming more immediate. The police continued to negotiate, trying to buy time and ensure everyone's safety. Finally, the standoff ended in a burst of activity. The SWAT team launched a coordinated assault, and within moments, the intruders were subdued and taken into custody. The office, which had been a scene of chaos and fear, was now filled with the sounds of relief in the aftermath of the crisis. In the days that followed, Emma and her colleagues were debriefed and offered counseling to help them cope with the traumatic experience. The truth about the hostage situation came to light. It turned out that Daniel had been coerced into cooperating with the intruders due to personal threats and blackmail. The intruders had exploited vulnerabilities within the company, targeting employees whose secrets could be used for leverage. Emma's view of her colleagues had shifted dramatically. The office, once a place of professional interaction, now felt like a landscape of hidden agendas and concealed truths. The incident had revealed the fragility of trust and the complexities of human motives. Emma, though grateful for her safety, was left with a lingering sense of unease and a deeper understanding of the dark undercurrents that can exist in seemingly ordinary settings. Story 31. When I first moved into the apartment on Elm Street, I was struck by how charming and seemingly genuine Mr. Thompson, the landlord, appeared. He was a middle-aged man with an affable smile, always ready with a friendly wave or a pleasant chat. The building itself was well maintained, and he seemed genuinely invested in ensuring that everything was perfect for his tenants. It was a refreshing change from the often impersonal and neglectful experiences many people have with landlords. Mr. Thompson's professionalism extended to every aspect of his management style. Rent was collected punctually, maintenance requests were addressed swiftly, and the building was impeccably clean. He was known around the neighborhood as someone who took great pride in his properties. Little did I know, this facade was concealing a much darker reality. Everything began to change when I noticed unusual activities in the building. At first, it was minor strange visitors coming and going at odd hours and a series of locked doors that were typically off limits to tenants. Mr. Thompson had always been cautious about security, but these peculiarities seemed excessive and out of character. One evening, as I was heading to my apartment, I overheard a heated conversation between Mr. Thompson and a man I didn't recognize. Their discussion was conducted in hushed, urgent tones, but I caught a few alarming snippets: shipment, product, and delivery. The conversation ended abruptly when they saw me approaching, and Mr. Thompson quickly ushered the man out of the building. Intrigued and concerned, I decided to do a little digging. I started by talking to some of the other tenants, hoping to uncover if they had noticed anything out of the ordinary. To my surprise, many were aware of the odd behavior but seemed reluctant to discuss it further. It was clear that they, too, felt something was amiss, but didn't want to stir trouble. Determined to get to the bottom of things, I decided to investigate further. I began by discreetly observing the comings and goings of the building. I noticed that certain apartments had frequent visitors who seemed to be involved in shady transactions. One apartment, in particular, had a steady stream of people visiting at all hours, often carrying large, unmarked packages. It was around this time that I discovered something truly unsettling. I managed to get a glimpse inside one of the restricted areas of the building thanks to an improperly locked door I had accidentally encountered. What I saw shocked me. The room was filled with crates of various products, each meticulously labeled and organized. It wasn't the contents that frightened me initially, but the fact that these products seemed to be from various manufacturers, none of which had any legitimate ties to the business. My suspicion grew as I pieced together the puzzle. Mr. Thompson's behavior began to make sense. The building wasn't just a place of residence, but a front for a criminal operation. The restricted areas and the shady transactions were all part of a larger, more sinister enterprise. One evening, I decided to confront Mr. Thompson. With my findings in hand, I went to his office, which was conveniently located on the ground floor. My heart raced as I prepared to confront him. When I brought up the strange activities and asked him about the restricted areas, he grew visibly tense. At first, Mr. Thompson tried to brush off my concerns with vague excuses, but as I pressed further, his demeanor shifted from uneasy to defensive. It was clear that my questions had struck a nerve. He attempted to placate me, offering reassurances that everything was above board, but his forced calmness only deepened my unease. Realizing that my confrontation was getting nowhere, I decided to take a different approach. I contacted the local authorities, sharing my observations and the evidence I had gathered. The police were initially skeptical, but after I provided them with the information and access to the restricted areas, they agreed to investigate. The investigation that followed was thorough and extensive. The authorities discovered that Mr. Thompson was indeed involved in a criminal enterprise that used the apartment building as a front for trafficking stolen goods. The restricted areas contained stolen electronics, luxury items, and counterfeit products, all neatly cataloged and prepared for distribution. Mr. Thompson was arrested and charged with multiple offenses, including theft, fecking, and conspiracy. The building was seized, and the tenants were relocated while the investigation continued. The entire ordeal left a mark on the community, and the once trusted landlord became a symbol of betrayal. In the aftermath, the building was cleaned up, and a new management company took over. The transition was smooth, but the shadow of Mr. Thompson's deception lingered. For me, the experience was a jarring reminder of how appearances can be deceiving. Even the most seemingly reliable and trustworthy individuals can hide a dark side behind a carefully maintained facade. The process of coming to terms with what had happened was challenging. It took time for me to feel comfortable and safe again, but the support from friends, family, and the community helped me heal. Through it all, I learned a valuable lesson about vigilance and the importance of trusting one's instincts, no matter how convincing the exterior may seem. Story 32. The pain had been persistent for months. a dull ache that turned sharper with every passing day. After countless visits to my primary doctor and a slew of tests, the conclusion was clear: I needed surgery. My insurance, as it turned out, was woefully inadequate for the procedure I required. The out-of-pocket costs were astronomical, far beyond what I could manage on my own. Desperate for relief and without other options, I found myself drawn to the grimy underbelly of the medical world. A friend, who had his own share of financial struggles, mentioned an underground clinic operating out of a nondescript building in a rundown part of town. The clinic was known among those in the know for offering procedures at a fraction of the cost, though its reputation was marred by whispers of questionable practices. With no other options, I made the fateful decision to investigate. The building was a dilapidated structure, its exterior marred by peeling paint and broken windows. I felt a shiver as I pushed open the heavy metal door, the creak echoing through the empty hallway. The interior was stark and uninviting. Flickering fluorescent lights barely illuminated the grimy floors and walls stained with age. I was met by a receptionist who barely looked up from her desk, her demeanor as cold and clinical as the surroundings. My consultation with the doctor was brief and disconcerting. He was a middle-aged man with a perpetually furrowed brow and a cigarette constantly dangling from his lips. He barely spoke and offered no reassuring words. Instead, he handed me a stack of forms, each one detailing risks and disclaimers, but in a language that felt oddly clinical and detached. The whole experience felt off, but I was too desperate to back out now. The procedure was scheduled for a week later. The day of the surgery was shrouded in an unsettling calm. The clinic seemed emptier than before, and the few staff members I encountered wore expressions of disinterest. The operating room was nothing like I had imagined. It was stark and sterile, but it lacked the reassuring cleanliness of a legitimate hospital. The surgical table was a grim metal slab, and the tools laid out were old and rusted. The anesthesia, when administered, was not the smooth induction I had hoped for. Instead, I felt a disorienting fog descend over me, but not enough to fully block out the sounds and sensations. I could hear muffled voices and the clinking of metal instruments, and I was acutely aware of the cold, harsh touch of hands on my skin. The procedure, though supposedly routine, was excruciatingly painful. The anesthesia seemed inadequate, leaving me fully conscious and aware of every agonizing moment. When I finally emerged from the haze of semi-consciousness, I was in a dimly lit recovery room, my body aching and my head pounding. I felt disoriented and confused, the experience having left me deeply unsettled. The recovery area was sparse, with only a worn-out cot and a threadbare blanket. There were no monitors or comforting beeps, just a heavy silence. Over the next few days, my recovery was anything but smooth. The pain intensified, and there were troubling signs of infection at the surgical site. The staff seemed indifferent to my suffering, offering little in the way of support or medical care. I was left to fend for myself, navigating the complexities of post-surgery care without any guidance. The lack of follow-up appointments and proper medical advice was deeply troubling. Eventually, I realized I couldn't handle it on my own. I sought help from a legitimate medical facility, where I was horrified to discover the extent of the damage. The procedure had been poorly performed, leading to complications that required further surgery to correct. The legitimate medical team was baffled by the shoddy work and the risk of severe complications that had been introduced. The aftermath of the ordeal left me with both physical and emotional scars. The recovery from the second surgery was long and grueling, and the trauma of the experience haunted me. I was plagued by nightmares and flashbacks of the underground clinic. The pain and suffering were a constant reminder of the risks I had taken in seeking help from an unregulated, dangerous source. In the end, the ordeal taught me a harrowing lesson about the dangers of cutting corners, especially when it comes to something as critical as medical care. The desire for a cheaper solution had led me into a nightmarish situation that could have been avoided with proper planning and research. It was a painful and deeply personal experience, one that left me with a profound understanding of the importance of safety and legitimacy in medical procedures. I now carry with me the awareness of just how precarious and perilous the world of underground medicine can be. It's a harsh reminder of the lengths to which people might go when faced with financial barriers, and the severe consequences that can result from choosing shortcuts over proper, regulated care. The scars, both physical and mental, serve as a constant reminder of the importance of seeking help through legitimate and trusted channels. Story 33. The day I met Natalie, I was immediately struck by her charisma. She had an energy that was almost magnetic, drawing people in with her infectious laugh and boundless enthusiasm. We were both newcomers to the same office, and her vivacious personality quickly made her the center of attention. I found myself gravitating towards her, charmed by her apparent confidence and the way she seemed to light up a room. Our friendship developed rapidly. We started spending time together outside of work, exploring the city and sharing our dreams and fears. Natalie seemed to have an endless well of stories and experiences that she was eager to share. At first, it felt exhilarating to be so close to someone who appeared to have it all together. Her life was a whirlwind of glamorous parties, high-profile contacts, and adventures that seemed almost too good to be true. However, as the months passed, I began to notice cracks in the facade. Natalie's stories often involved manipulative tactics and dubious ethics. She would speak casually about bending rules and exploiting opportunities to her advantage, all while presenting herself as a victim of circumstances. Her casual disregard for boundaries started to unsettle me, but I pushed my concerns aside, rationalizing them as quirks of her larger-than-life personality. The real trouble began when Natalie started involving me in her schemes. It started innocently enough, with minor favors, picking up items from questionable sources or covering for her in situations where she had overstepped her bounds. I was eager to help, partly because I wanted to maintain our friendship, and partly because Natalie made me feel special by including me in her world. The first serious red flag appeared when Natalie convinced me to accompany her to a high-stakes social event under the guise of it being a harmless networking opportunity. She had a way of convincing people to trust her, and I was no exception. The event was held in a lavish private club, and I quickly realized that the company Natalie was keeping was far from reputable. The guests were a mix of shady business figures and individuals with dubious backgrounds. The atmosphere was charged, and I felt out of place. Natalie, however, seemed perfectly at ease. She navigated the room with practiced ease, and I was swept along in her wake. That night, I witnessed Natalie engaging in activities that made me profoundly uncomfortable, discussions about financial schemes and under-the-table deals, all while she maintained a facade of charming socialite. I was deeply disturbed but unsure how to address it without jeopardizing our friendship. The situation escalated when Natalie persuaded me to invest in a business venture that she claimed was a sure thing. The pitch was compelling promises of high returns and success stories that seemed plausible. I was hesitant but was reassured by Natalie's confident assurances and the seemingly professional presentation. Against my better judgment, I invested a significant amount of money. It wasn't long before things began to unravel. The business venture turned out to be a front for a fraudulent scheme. I started receiving harassing phone calls from aggressive individuals demanding repayment for non-existent loans and investments. My name was being dragged into a mess that I had been foolishly lured into by Natalie's deceitful charm. When I confronted Natalie, her demeanor shifted from friendly to cold and defensive. She dismissed my concerns with a wave of her hand, insisting that I must have misunderstood or that I was being overly sensitive. Her ability to deflect blame and manipulate the situation was both impressive and terrifying. She continued to portray herself as a victim of circumstances, playing on my sympathies and confusing me further. As the situation grew increasingly dire, I began to investigate on my own. My search led me to uncover disturbing truths about Natalie's background. It became clear that her charming exterior was a carefully constructed mask designed to manipulate those around her. Her history was littered with failed schemes and broken relationships, all orchestrated to advance her own interests at the expense of others. The final straw came when I learned that Natalie had been involved in even darker activities. Her schemes included exploiting vulnerable individuals and orchestrating illegal operations under the guise of legitimate businesses. I realized with horror that her seemingly glamorous lifestyle was built on a foundation of deceit and manipulation. Feeling betrayed and disillusioned, I cut off all contact with Natalie. The process of disentangling myself from her schemes was arduous and emotionally draining. I had to deal with the fallout of my investment, work to clear my name, and confront the financial and personal damage she had caused. The experience left a profound impact on me. I was forced to reevaluate my judgment and the nature of trust in relationships. The allure of Natalie's charismatic personality had masked her toxic behavior and sinister motives. I had been swept up in her charm and failed to see the warning signs until it was almost too late. In the aftermath, I took time to rebuild my life and regain my sense of self. The betrayal had shaken me deeply, but it also led to valuable lessons about the importance of discerning genuine connections from manipulative facades. I learned to trust my instincts and approach relationships with a more cautious and discerning eye. Natalie eventually faded from my life, but her impact lingered. The experience served as a stark reminder of how easily trust can be exploited and how important it is to protect oneself from toxic influences. Moving forward, I became more vigilant about the people I allowed into my life, ensuring that they aligned with my values and treated me with the respect and integrity that everyone deserves. Story 34. It all began on a crisp autumn day when I wandered into a neighborhood I didn't usually frequent. As I strolled past a quaint, ivy-clad building, a handwritten sign caught my eye: "Open House, discover your true self." Curiosity got the better of me, so I decided to step inside. The interior was unlike anything I'd seen before, dimly lit with candles and adorned with intricate symbols. Soft, ambient music played in the background, and the atmosphere was oddly calming. I was greeted by a warm, charismatic woman named Ilara, who welcomed me with a soothing smile. She invited me to join a discussion group that was about to start. I agreed, intrigued by the promise of self-discovery. The discussion was led by a man named Gabriel, whose presence was magnetic. He spoke of enlightenment and personal transformation, using language that resonated deeply with me. The other attendees seemed genuinely enthusiastic, and the sense of community was palpable. By the end of the evening, I felt a strange but compelling connection to this group. Over the next few weeks, I attended more meetings. Each session grew more intense, focusing on deeper aspects of personal growth and spiritual awakening. Gabriel's teachings became increasingly esoteric, and the rituals more elaborate. We began participating in meditative practices that involved chanting and visualization. While some of it felt unconventional, I was willing to embrace it in the name of personal development. Things took a darker turn when I was invited to a weekend retreat organized by the group. The location was a remote, picturesque estate surrounded by dense forest. It seemed like the perfect place for a retreat, away from the hustle of everyday life. Upon arrival, the atmosphere was serene, but a subtle sense of unease settled over me. The first night was filled with communal activities that seemed innocent enough: bonfires, storytelling, and guided meditations. However, as the retreat progressed, the activities grew increasingly unsettling. Gabriel introduced what he called ritualistic purification, which involved symbolic acts of surrender and sacrifice. It was explained as a way to rid oneself of negative energy and past traumas. During one of these rituals, we were asked to write down our deepest fears and then burn the papers in a ceremonial fire. I felt uneasy about the ritual's intensity, but was reassured by the group's unwavering commitment and Gabriel's assurances. I complied, but the experience left me feeling vulnerable and exposed. As the retreat continued, the rituals became more disturbing. One night, we were led to a hidden part of the estate where we were asked to participate in what Gabriel described as a transcendent